Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. Um, we are on to the senior synth stream about drum machines, and our guests are Richard de Hove. I don't know if I pronounce it right.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Good, good. You are from Tasmania,
Yep.
or at the moment, at least. And we will also have Ken Flux Pierce when he wakes up, and and I can't pronounce the name.
Quincas.
Quincas,
Quincas.
yes, yeah, Quincas de Moya, or Moya, and here he is. It's the Synth DIY guy.
Hey guys,
Good morning.
Greetings.
morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, everything's
All
fine,
good.
and it's 7 o'clock at your place now.
Yeah, it's 7 o'clock, and I expected my daughters to sleep in a bit, but they woke up hungry, so I'm a uh, little. Well, actually, I'm only a minute late. It seems, so it's not too bad.
It's okay. It's okay. Um, and we're
Henrik
still waiting
was.
for Kent his sleeping probably.
Yeah,
I've seen his active on Facebook, so I think he's on his way.
yeah, I'm sure he is.
And it's okay.
Is Ken in the East Coast or West Coast of the states?
He's around Detroit,
Oh,
as I remember.
so that's the middle. That's the same time
Yeah,
zone as I'm in, so it's probably 7 o'clock for him as well.
yeah. It's no, I think it's 9 o'clock at his place.
Oh yeah, so Detroit
Yeah,
is 2 hours ahead of me. Okay. Uh,
uh, uh, it's what I looked up after. Uh, so, so you are ready with the coffee there in Mexico?
what's that?
You are ready with your coffee in Mexico?
Yeah, I'm. I had to make my coffee to be able to be operational. It's
Yeah.
lubrication for the brain.
Uh, Here it's 15 or 3 o'clock p.m.
Right.
Um, so it's in Denmark,
Yeah,
and
2300 in Tasmania.
a bit late. So, but I told Richard he shouldn't worry. The stream is only about 8 hours.
Okay.
Oh, about two and a half, and if anyone wants to leave early, it's okay. So that's how
Right.
it is.
Oh, I should be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Eventually, somebody might. My wife is a doctor.
Yeah.
At some point, she might have to go see some patients, and I'll be in charge of the girls. In
Yeah.
the meantime, we're good.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know Richard can talk a lot about drum machines, so
Yeah, I can gabble on endlessly.
Oh, I see you have a Syntrax 2 there as well.
Yeah, I've actually had it for about 2 months and I've only turned it on once just to make
Oh,
sure it works. Isn't that heresy, you see? But I've got my excuse already, which is I'm having such a great time with all my other machines that I've got at the moment,
there you
especially
go.
especially this little guy.
Nice.
That
Oh, yeah. Is that the Percons?
Yeah, so I'm having such fun with that that
Yeah.
I'm leaving the Syntrex here. It's sort of like the unwrapped Christmas present. You sort of
Right.
go, oh, I'm having great fun. Oh, it's fantastic, and then you think, oh, I won't open that one yet,
Well, I'm working
because
on the video manual for it, so I'm
yeah, I remember you saying ages ago, and I actually checked about a week ago. I thought, Kinker said he was going to do the big manual on that, and I had a look, and I went, oh, yeah, hasn't got onto that yet.
yeah,
But
I'm
so I thought I'd watch that first
a
before.
little bit of a backlog going on here, but I'm working on it. I've made a
There
big
always
cheat
is,
sheet.
isn't there?
Made a big cheat sheet for it because there's
Oh,
so
okay.
many little button combos to remember that my brain isn't good enough for that. So I need to have some kind of reference in the manual. You don't want to go be looking in the manual while you're narrating these things. So I have
Uh,
so I can just flow and explain what it does, and when I need to mention a particular function, I have it right in front of me, what the combinations are and
I
stuff.
like reading manuals, though. Do you enjoy reading manuals? Like, do you find it enjoyable?
Well, I think it's like any other kind of literature. It depends on the author, and the subject matter. There are manuals that are fun to read. I remember when I first got into music production for real in like 2000, I got hired at a production studio in Brazil, and I had been working with ADATs, and it was the first time I saw Pro Tools in front of my face. I devoured that like, it's a Bible. It's like this thick. It was still a physical manual. I devoured that in a weekend, and I read it like it was, a Michael Crichton novel. I loved it.
Oh, isn't that nice?
And but there have been some Roland manuals in the past where the Japanese has been so poorly translated to English that it becomes, an exercise in deciphering what they really meant, and then it's less than enjoyable. So it depends. Some manuals I like to read. Some manuals I read because I have to. The synthrax, I'm actually a bit embarrassed because I had a live stream with Geertz from Erica Synth about the synthrax, and I was going crazy, with my other duties. I was never fully able to devour the manual before then, and so I'm clearly a little bit lost during that live stream. It's a little embarrassing.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
gonna make up
Well,
for it with the
I watched
manual.
that one, but then Erica Gear, often I find the manuals lag behind what they've actually done, especially on release. I mean, they usually include a beautiful manual with the thing, like with the
Mhm.
Perkins. It's got a beautiful manual, but it's already completely irrelevant.
Right,
And
because the firmware
I
changes.
yeah, so I went on. I forget which forum it was, and went, it's great, but how do I do this? It's in, and somebody said, basically, idiot, look on page X, but it was page X on the PDF because the printed
Right.
manual, which is what I was looking at, it wasn't in there because it was all the firmware updates. So it's a bit of a shame, They give you this beautiful manual on this nice heavy stock, and almost as you open the box, it's irrelevant. Not that I'm complaining about firmware updates,
No,
but
I think
you know,
that's a trend nowadays, and unfortunately, even older, more established manufacturers are putting out products before they really crystallize into their final form. So, I think printing manuals is probably not a great idea these days, anyways, since everything has kind of a digital brain and ends up incorporating more features as time goes by. Like the Akai stuff, for example, comes out pretty, sometimes even a little bit half baked, I would say. As much of a fan as I am of the MPCs and stuff, um, I see that as a trend nowadays. A lot of gear comes out and it's not fully fleshed out yet. So I guess Erica suffers from that a bit as well. But for in their case, I see it as a true passion for the product. So they're really excited about adding features, and they're also excited about releasing it. So it can't
yeah, no, they're
much.
pretty good. They're pretty good with the firmware. That's
Yeah,
for sure. It's like the little DBO one, which is still my favorite machine of all time. But they've done a lot of firmware updates
yeah.
and responded pretty well to what people have wanted, and
Okay.
so that's really improved.
Oh, this is not the DBO one though. This is the
That's
Alex.
it's his brother.
Yeah,
Yeah, they're beautiful side by side, though, aren't they?
they are. They are. I had them going for a while, but eventually I stopped using the DBO one so much because I felt a bit limited with the user interface. But I continue using the LXR a lot.
Limited by the DBO one. Oh no.
Well, it's we all have different methods of working.
Yeah, of course.
I,
Whoa.
I'm a bass player myself, so I'm very used to a very hands-on performance style of playing, and the DB one is very much you can play it, but it's really more meant to be programmed, and it's not really my thing. I prefer either to play a synth, and then maybe record a performance and then edit that, or just play bass. Even the drums now, I don't know if you can see behind me, I actually have a drum set.
Oh, the real thing.
Yeah, and I have it mic'd up and ready to go all the time. And I've been practicing my little ass off with the rudiments and stuff, trying to develop myself to actually become a good drummer um, on the acoustic kit. Because
How do you handle the BPM thing? Do you actually drum to a click track, or
it
is
depends on
BPM
what
not
I'm
important?
producing. Yeah, it depends on what I'm producing. Sometimes I go through layers of production where I'm kind of putting scaffolding up and then remove it and replace it as I go. So what I'll sometimes do is I hate metronomes. I find them sterile and uninspiring. I think it's a horrible way to start a track is to turn on a click track. So what I first do is I'll just jam out, and then I'll find a loop I really like from what I played, and then I'll measure the BPM of that. I'll set up my DAW session to be in that BPM, and then I'll produce over that loop that I created. And then at the end, I might remove the loop and play along to my track. Sometimes what I do is I'll choose a track, an existing track I really like. Let's say um, I don't know, some Brazilian funk track that I'm inspired by. I'll put that on headphones and play along with it as if that were my metronome, you know. And what that'll do is that'll inspire me way more than playing to a click, because there'll be transitions, there'll be textural changes, you know, and there'll be movement that'll lead my playing in different directions. And then I'll have, you know, more material. Sometimes I'll even end up using the form of the original track for my new track, since I played over it, and I will already have played fills and have changed the groove in different sections, and that'll serve as a skeleton of form for the rest of the composition. So I've really been enjoying that. I don't know if you've seen this movie by Michel Gondry called "Be Kind, Rewind" with Jack Black. In this movie, they magnetize all of the VHS tapes in the store, and they go and then they have this problem where people are coming in to rent videos. So what they start doing is they start recreating the films with their camera, you know, with a home camera. So they do their own homemade version of Ghostbusters, for example. And then when people start complaining, they say this is not the original. They say no, that's better than the original. It's and they invent this word called "sweeted," like it's made in Sweden for some reason. So I use that word. I say that I'm sweeting these original tracks in the sense I take like a Michael Jackson song and I put it on my headphones and I play along to it without trying to replicate the exact drum part, you know, just using it as sort of a fancy metronome with a form, and I'll use that to inspire me. But then, of course, I'll come up with a different bass line and you know, a different kind of a guitar rhythm or whatnot. And by the end, I have something completely different from the original Michael Jackson track. Um, but I used it as a resource to help me develop it, and I call that sweeting, just like, you know, remaking, doing homemade versions of these classic films. Was referred to as sweeting in the Michel Gondry
I
movie.
gotta remember that word. It reminds me of when we used Betamax in the early 80s. Um, Overdubbing was an option, the audio.
Oh,
And
right.
we rented a, a, a movie, a drawn movie, a dirty movie called um, um, Snow White and the Seven Lovers or something like that. Um, and and we overdubbed the sound, and it was quite fun to give it back to the shop and know that someone would
Oh
have
man, that's comedy
enough.
gold. You know, I've seen
Yeah,
so many hilarious things done that way.
yeah.
All of Voodoo, I think, some of their early music was to porn movies. That's how they started off, doing soundtracks to porn movies.
There you go.
So I believe. Not that I've ever seen any, but I'm sure I saw that
Oh,
in an interview or something like that. But hey, look, can I play you? Can I play you something? since we're talking about drum machines. Oh,
Of
thanks
course.
for kissing that machine earlier on for the comment. But I'm just going to unmute myself on this, and I'll just play my favourite ever clip of a drum machine out of a movie. This is Liquid Sky. Do you know Liquid Sky? These sort of it's an 80s movie. But anyway, there's this scene in it where the girl is got a CR78 strapped to her hip, which is
Wow, wow.
5.5 kilos, and she's singing a song in a club.
If this is true, so it's high, so am I. Do you wanna know why? It is.
Anyway,
Oh, what a time to be alive back then.
it's a great movie though. But I always admired her because, I mean, obviously it's just a movie, but you know, it's one thing to be able to try to walk around with a synth, you know, one of those ridiculous synth tars or
Right.
you know whatever they used to call it. But walking around with a drum machine strapped to you, I thought, well, that's pretty impressive.
That is.
So I love that scene, that movie. That's a
I
great movie.
saw
It's
recently at one of the trade shows somebody came up with a marching band harness for a synthesizer. I guess that would have come in handy for her in this scene, I think. Have you seen that? It's like a way to be able to march around playing your synth.
oh yeah, the U.S. marching bands. Well, I've seen them with the you know the
Yeah.
xylophones and
Right. So
things.
somebody came
It's
up with one for a synth. Or I guess you could use it for a drum machine or whatever.
yeah, I can't really get into those American marching bands. They're a bit tippy tappy for me. You know, they're a
Oh
bit sort
yeah.
of. I like the sort of the Scottish one. You know, you got the bagpipes and a big bass
Nice.
drum. Boom, boom.
No, I wasn't. I actually went to high school in the States. I'm Brazilian originally, but I went to high school in the States and I never got into marching band. But now I regret it. Now that I'm 48 and working on my paradiddles, I really wished I'd had 4 years of high school doing drum corps. I would have made my life easier. But that's yeah. There's something to it as well. It's kind of meditative for me to put on put a rubber pad in front of me and grab some sticks and just spend an hour playing 16th notes. it's quite an exercise.
Well,
I
if we were
remember,
going to,
yeah,
no, you go.
okay. Just want to say that I remember my brother from my childhood. He was playing drums, and um, it was hard for the rest of the family.
Well, that's the reason I'm not a drummer originally.
Mm.
I lived in an apartment building in Brazil. And I remember at some point when I was like 10 or something, my parents were divorced, but they talked a lot about, how my upbringing should be. And my dad had voiced his opinion that I should learn an instrument. So my mom came and said, "Hey, your dad and I talked, and we think you should learn how to play an instrument. Which instrument would you like to play?" And I immediately said the drums. And she said, "Okay, piano it is then." Because I lived with my grandmother in a small apartment in Santos, Brazil, and it wasn't going to be viable to play the drums in that context. So I started as a pianist, and then I I fell in love with the bass. After that, became a bass player. I actually went to college as a bass player, learned jazz bass, upright and electric. And I kind of see my life as this trajectory as this towards the drums eventually. Now that I have a studio that's separated from the house and I make my living with music, nobody can tell me I can't play my drums.
So it's like the old joke, isn't it? What do you call somebody who hangs around musicians? A drummer?
Yeah, there you go. There's so
I like
many of
that
those.
one. Yeah.
What do you call what's the difference between a coffin and an upright bass? is the coffin is the big wooden box with the guy with no life on the inside. I think these haven't aged very well. It was funnier when I was in college 25 years ago.
Well, it is called the Senior Synth Stream. So
There
Well,
you go.
if we're going to go right back, then I was remembering right back in the early '80s when drum machines first came in, and I recalled here in Australia the Musicians Union was bleating about it, about how terrible drum machines were for some time, and they kept on saying drum machines should be banned. We should ban them. You shouldn't be able to perform with a drum machine. It's going to put drummers out of work.
That's stupid.
And I thought, hey, that'd be fantastic because we already had a drum machine. I thought this would be great publicity, because we'd already, when we played, we'd usually be supporting some hard rock band or something like that, and then we'd turn up, and our lineup was an 808, an MS-20, a Poly 6, a Pro 1, and a Mono Poly. And, not a guitar or drummer to be seen. And so there'd be a lineup, hard rock band, us, hard rock band. So I thought this would be even better publicity. We'd turn
That's a
up and
nice contract.
plug in the forbidden machine. It's a drum machine. But yeah,
In
it's
Brazil,
completely
there was a
absurd.
big outrage against electric guitars too, because but the bossa nova was the national pride. And then when the Tropicalia movement started and the rock and roll influence and electric guitars started being used, all these purist Brazilians raised arms against it. I guess that'll always happen. Now it's happening with AI. People are scared that AI is going to take their jobs. A while ago, it was samplers. Like orchestras were scared that
Yep.
using sampled orchestras was going to replace the real musicians. But somehow, drummers are still a thing. Even they haven't been all replaced with drum machines. Orchestras still exist. Composers, I think, will also still exist, and producers.
Uh,
After all,
it
art
took
is
a
a process, right? It's not just a result from a prompt. And humans
uh,
will always want to make it, and even if an AI can do it better, we're still gonna want to do it.
But it takes a lot for a drum machine to take over what a real drummer can do anyway. And I certainly remember in the early days, you'd have, and even with the 808, which is what we played with initially, it was the best drum machine we could afford at the time because,
Right.
as a struggling band, you go, wow, we've got an 808, fantastic. But it's not got the guts of a Lindrum or something that
Right.
had at the time, that can actually thump something out. So, um, although the 808's now this sort of holy instrument, at
Well,
the
that's the
time
thing, with
it
its
was like
limitations.
pitter patter, and we'd always be turning it up, and then we'd try to sort of tune the bass drum up so we could actually turn it up without blowing things up. And I remember we were in rehearsal once in this studio, and we were with the 808, and of course it wasn't set up for drum machines, and so there we are with the going boof, boof, boof. And about halfway through the rehearsal, we said, yeah, it's just sounding worse than normal. And I was like, and we thought, uh-oh. So we didn't go back to that one. I felt I feel guilty now. It's like 40 years later. I think I blew up one of their wedges, but anyway. And then the
Probably.
606 was even worse. It was like this tippy tappy little thing. One of the guys in the band bought a 606, mainly just for him to play with at home. But, tippy tappy, you couldn't get anything with any real guts out of it. And,
I
you
don't think
notice that.
drum machines will ever replace real drummers in genres where drumming is key and it's essential, like rock. There's just something to a human, banging on cylinders with sticks that you're never gonna get with, and that's fine. I think drum machines cease to try. I mean, the point of drum machines has not, even if the manufacturers originally thought that they were trying to replace a drummer, it's not what they actually serve, the purpose they actually serve in real life. There have been whole genres built around the drum machine sound where that's what you want. If you don't want a real drummer on a techno gig, he's just gonna get bored out of his mind and eventually go out of time or something. But yeah, a drum machine is perfect for that. But then the Red Hot Chili Peppers are not ever going to replace Chad Smith with drum machine, no matter how good it is. Even with AI, I've used for fun. I've used the Logic Pro drummer, which is impressive because you can kind of describe, explain to the machine that you want it to be a little more complex at part B, and then do a fill. You can kind of teach it like you would a real drummer, and the samples are good, So it's fairly convincing, I guess, for an untrained ear. It might sound like an actual drummer playing, but it'll get you to a certain point. At above that, as far as quality of production goes, you will want a real drummer. There's just something.
Yeah, but the other problem we always had, and we got this was one of the greatest drum machines we got when it came out, was the
EMU.
Yeah, the Drumulator. It was a
Right.
fantastic machine. Absolutely loved this machine. And but the trouble was the memory was so terrible. And so in rehearsal, it was all sounding great, but we could only fit half the set into the memory. So halfway through the set, we had a little Walkman tape player, and we'd actually download the next half of the set via tape memory into the drum machine. So that's pretty nerve-wracking.
I think one trick that people used back then was to just half the sample rate, right? So you'd increase the memory on the machine, and that would make it extra gritty and crunchy sounding.
It just
know
didn't
if you
have
did
very
that
many
with the
pattern
Drumulator.
slots, but
Yeah.
yeah, so that one didn't last long, even though I absolutely loved the sound of that one. But this is one of the ones we had as well. This is Yamaha MR10. Apparently, it's their only analog machine they ever made.
Really?
And
I've never heard of that one.
yeah, actually, if I just turn the sound on for a second, it has just all these pre-programmed rhythms. It's absolutely primitive.
It looked so much modern than the. It looks like something that in the 90s.
Yeah, so it's it's
I have to
totally
mention-
primitive.
I have to mention while Richard plays videos and instruments, we have to keep quiet because there's echo on.
Yeah, I noticed.
Yeah. But you didn't know that.
Yeah. No, sorry, I'm trying to be good with my mute button because I've got to hit the mute button as soon as I finish playing it. But it seems a shame not to have the 8-bit glory just for a few seconds. But that machine, of course, we never use it live because you can't sync it to anything and it's all hopeless. But the only guy in the band at the time who actually knew what he was doing ran that through his MS-20. And that machine being run through an MS-20, I still dream about that fantastic sound. It's like, and Quincas, you mentioned the bossa nova rhythm. I think that one's got a bossa nova preset on it, and you'd run it through
All of
the
them do.
MS-20, and now it's not bossa nova. It was this incredible industrial.
Right.
It was fantastic, but that was another problem at the time. We'd have that you could get this sort of great stuff in rehearsal, but if you tried to sort of engineer that live, it was so fiddly and delicate and difficult, and
And each room will sound different. Each speaker setup will sound different.
yeah.
I guess that's an advantage of nowadays, being able to find something in the studio and then just record it, and trigger the samples later.
It's even on our first gig, in our very first gig we played, and we were using an 808, and we had all the machines synced actually from the 808. And again, the only guy there who actually knew what he was doing, he built these amazing little interface boxes, so we could actually trigger all the different manufacturer boxes from I think it was the cowbell on the 808, so we could have a clock for all the arpeggiators. And and that
That's
was
the
great. And
world's
there were,
most brutal metronome.
and it was all going great, except on top of one of the speakers was some cardboard box or something. I forget exactly what it was. Anyway, as the thing was playing, the box vibrated off, fell onto the 808, switched it off. So every machine stopped playing because we were just sort of like live arpeggiating, and for a second we tried to get it going again, but of course it was all desynchronized and it was a total mess. So we just sort of looked at each other and went, "Well, that's that song done." Anyway, everyone, yay, like this. We
I
thought,
have a
oh well,
similar.
they don't know when the song ends, but we were crushed. And after various technical problems like that, we actually got an offer of more work after that. Oh, come and play here and come and play there. And we were just devastated because we'd had so many technical issues. We went, oh, no, I don't think so. But
I have a similar anecdote about a different 808 machine. In the early noughts, I went on tour in Europe with a Brazilian group, a Brazilian singer called Andrea Marquis. And I was just starting my career producing at the studio in Brazil. And they were like, "Oh, you're a bass player and you also do electronic stuff. Why don't you join the tour as the bass player and sampler player?" And this was before Ableton Live. So I had the Roland SP808, which is a phrase sampling machine. And what we did is we dumped into it a bunch of the material from the original record. So all of the electronic beats, everything, I had them all there on pads. And I would literally just, hold a loop with the hold button on the SP808, and the whole band would play along without any clicks or anything. We just hear that beat, and we'd play along with them, and I would make transitions with my live while playing the bass. Sometimes I had to play a couple notes with just the left hand, so I'd have my right hand free to release one of the loops and start another one. And this was just audio, no MIDI. But it kind of worked. We rehearsed it, and I would play that sampler like an instrument. But then one day in Mainz, in Germany, the machine didn't boot. The zip disk didn't read. We had already started playing. We'd started the introduction to the whole gig, and the entire gig was, somehow tied to that machine. So I went walking around with my bass and to each musician saying, we're on our own. So the drummer had to improvise, because he would always sort of complement the electronic beats, but then he became the main beat for that show. And it was actually one of the best shows we did. I think just the fact that we had to improvise and think on our feet. And then the next day we were in Spain, and I bought a little Yamaha sampler. And the tour manager booked me 2 hours in a studio with Pro Tools, and I put the singer on the booth to record some backing vocals, and I got ripped stuff from the CD. And in the hotel, I was reading the manual for the sampler and reprogramming it, and we did the gig in Madrid with a new sampler, while our label manager was taking the SP808 to get fixed. A week later, he showed up at a gig in London with a new, like a white zip drive installed into my SP808, and we were able to continue using it. But by then, I had been traveling with a mini disc recorder and capturing sounds from the tour, and I had inserted some of those sounds as sound bites and ear candy in the new sampler. And by then, I had already grown attached to those new sounds, so I was using both samplers. I had the original one that we'd prepared the whole show with, and I had the new one with the stuff that had been added throughout the tour. I think sometimes these accidents that they take us out of our comfort zone and push us towards even more creative situations. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, when I look back now, I think we never had any backup for anything.
I actually thought I was very professional because I had a backup of the zip disk. I was like, oh, if something happens to this zip disk, I'm a professional. I have another one. But the drive was what busted, so I couldn't get it to work. I guess I would have had to have a second unit a second machine ready to go, and we weren't at that level of professionalism yet.
The samplers we used much later on were EPSs. We had 2N Sonic EPSs, and the beauty of those machines was that you could load them as you were playing. So we were sort of like a sampler band at that stage. So we had a whole string of vocalists, and none of them ever seemed to work out. So we went, well, we'll just replace them with samples.
There you go.
But it wasn't singing samples. It was just sort of quote samples. So it was all a bit sort of quirky. But then we didn't have a front man. But anyway, that's another story.
Oh man,
But,
I remember the MPCs, like the MPC 2000. You had to. Some of my friends would have a box full of floppies, and they would spend 15 minutes before the gig just inserting one floppy after another to load. And then, if for some reason somebody tripped over the power cord, and the MPC got turned off, it wiped the memory, and you had to reload the entire set. Eventually I had a zip drive installed on one of my MPCs to make it a little bit better. But yeah, man, so many, so many funny, interesting issues from the limitations of technology back then. I guess when Ableton Live was a thing, then a lot of those problems were solved because people just started using their laptops. But
it gets terribly boring when
exactly.
you've got too much recorded, though, isn't it? Like for a short while, we played with a pretty comprehensive backing track. We actually used a Betamax video with a pulse code modulator to get the sort of fidelity up, and that was the backing. That was the backing track, and but there was so much on the backing track, and a couple of times. There was a little bit of, on-stage miming going on, which was the worst, most horrible, revolting thing ever having to do, because then you don't get any enjoyment from playing. You've got to keep up your miming because often gigs, the people in the front row are all musos going, yeah, what machine's he playing? What
Right.
bit's that? Sort of sort of going, but it was awful. And so it was the earlier days when we actually had everything synchronized, everything was live, and that was much more exciting, much more interesting.
Yeah, much more dangerous too.
Yeah, but keeps life interesting.
Exactly. We play it so safe sometimes that it's just no fun anymore. But now I think after 20 years of Ableton Live and almost, right, I think people are finding hybrid systems and setups that bring the best of both worlds together. Like I have a friend who does an amazing techno set with a modular, but he manages to pull it off like a DJ, where you have transitions, build-ups, and drops and stuff. And I'm like, how is he doing that? So one day I asked him to stand next to him, watch him play, and asked him a few questions, and I realized that his entire beat is a wave file that lasts the entire set, and that's playing on Ableton. And then what he has is MIDI synced to that, going to the different machines. And basically what he's doing with the modular is he's just having fun with filters and delay times and frequencies and different effects. So he is performing, but the bulk of the composition is predetermined. So he knows when there's a buildup coming up and when there will be a drop, and he just plays with the effects, and then on top of that he'll play like some crazy more generative kind of a thing, or he'll maybe play a melody with a controller. But it's kind of it really makes his set very exciting, for one, because it's not somebody just kind of improvising or trying to get the machines to actually do buildups where you have only two hands. How do you know? How do you do a ratchet and go up with the filter and build up the delay? So he has a lot of that stuff pre-programmed and ready to go. Like if he were to just lift his hands, the set keeps going, But he makes it much more interesting and exciting by what he's actually doing on top. I think that's a smart way to go about this kind of thing when you're playing by yourself. But um, but I mean, that's for him personally. I don't find that exciting. And I used to want to be one of those guys that, one man band live. I'm a one man band in the studio. I play the drums and the bass and the keys and whatnot, and I come up with full songs that where I've played everything myself. But I don't want to do that live. I'd rather be interacting with other people. If I'm playing by myself live, then I'll probably not try to do like a full band kind of a thing. It'll be more experimental, more noise or drone oriented, more improvised kind of approach, where I'm not trying to be like the drums and the bass and the melody, and and keep everything exciting and keep people interested and keep dancing.
And look interesting at the same
Yeah,
time.
I'm
Yeah.
kind of like I'm over that now. I don't need that validation. But yeah, I've tried it. I've done it successfully a couple of times in my life. Where okay, I see I can do that. But did I have fun? Was it what? No, it was stressful the whole time. And I barely pulled it off. And I'm like, I don't need that anymore. I want to have fun when I'm playing live.
Yeah, and be able to share it with someone else.
Exactly. And there's something with the synergy and the feedback that you get with other musicians and with an audience that you just don't get when you're by yourself.
Well, back to drum machines. Shall we talk a little bit about the LXR? Um,
Sure.
who knows the history of it?
Oh,
I
I
know
know.
that there was the original.
Mine's a little dusty. Go ahead, Richard. You were telling us
Oh,
about
no, I know. There was the original LXR, which was wasn't that a kit machine?
Yeah,
I think it was a kit
it
machine.
was a kit by Sonic Potions, and there was a whole community around it, with internet threads about people helping each other to build it, and you could expand it with outs. So I never got into that project, even though I was into DIY already at that point, but I didn't, I wasn't aware of that machine. I kind of found out about that whole scene retrospectively or retroactively. But then Erica asked me to do the manual for the LXR02, and that's when I started researching and finding out about the previous iteration of the machine.
So you did the manual?
I have the physical manual for it somewhere.
Yeah, but I must say, I was very impressed when I got this instrument, because this is very uncommon. It's
Yes.
but it's very much needed. Instead of having to print out everything,
Uh-huh.
here it is, and it was with the instrument. So
Yeah, it's nice. It's nice to have a little booklet to look through.
yeah,
This is one of the longest videos. I think it's a 2-hour video I made for the LXR02 because it has so much to it, and I wanted to show how to use pads to control it, to play the sounds and how to synchronize it to different things. So it was a tough video to make because there's so much to it. But I really, I think it's my favorite drum machine, the LXR02. I have shitloads of equipment that I will use once a year maybe because it's just so much, and I'm actually a professional composer, so I'm writing music every day, and I need to be kind of practical and pragmatic. So I'll use soft synths and drum machines in the computer, or my MPC I use a lot because it's something that I can easily dial in a particular kind of sound and program a beat. But the LXR, I feel like it pushes me to more interesting novel sounds, to where I can make something that has the power and effectiveness of that you would expect from a modern drum machine as far as how punchy and snappy and powerful it sounds. But at the same time, it doesn't sound like anything else. It doesn't sound like a Roland machine or like a Nakai or anything. So I'm very excited to use the LXR in conjunction with my acoustic drumming. I really love the combination. of both. We were talking about my process. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll do an electronic beat with the LXR, and that'll be my metronome, right? And then I'll play the drums on top of that. Sometimes I'll just play cymbals because I mean the kick and snare are already like snappy and funky enough from the machine, and then cymbals will just give it that more organic texture on top, and they work really well together. But it's a beautiful machine. I love how immediate and it is to tweak the sounds and find different sounds from the presets, and then if you like it, you save that preset. It's beautiful. It's out of so many things that I get to review on from my channel. Many of them become kind of collection pieces where I'll have an idea that requires that thing and I'll pull it out. But the LXR is one of the few machines that's actually become part of my regular tool set for actual, everyday work.
Well, that's a big compliment then.
Yeah,
I,
sure.
I haven't the
Yeah.
same. It's
I actually bought a Vader Fox, what was it, EC4 little MIDI controller just before I got the LXR because I thought, oh yeah, the LXR looks pretty complex. It's only got 4 knobs. So I thought, oh, I'll get one of these Vader Fox things to go with it so I can quickly access it. But in fact, I never used it once with the LXR because it was amazingly easy to program
Yeah, the thing
considering
with
how
the
deep
four
it is.
knobs where those 4 knobs change function depending on which screen, and you see it written right on there. That makes it very intuitive to use.
Yeah, so the ergonomics, I think, are quite beautifully arranged. It's very quick to get into everything, and the fact that it's so small is fantastic. I mean,
Oh yeah,
one of the things about the Perkins is that it's so gigantic that you've made a massive commitment in real estate
totally.
and money, but a massive real estate commitment. So
Well,
you're absolutely obliged to get something out of it.
it's interesting how both machines come from the same manufacturer because they're almost opposing ends of the spectrum. Whereas the LXR is completely digital, it has a very deep menu structure. The Percons is completely analog, and there's not even a screen. Everything is right in front of you. So it's something for both kinds of approaches. And I think they were smart to do that. It's the same company gives you both directions. It's very cool. I don't have the Percons yet, but I'm gonna start bugging Gears to see. That thing looks awesome.
It's a beautiful machine. The only complaint I've got is it should be black. Of course, it
Right.
should be black. Obviously, it should be black.
As
Erica Synth
everything else,
stuff is
right?
black.
Yeah.
So, and I know that they did do a tiny little run because there was one video on YouTube of some guy and he's got a black Perkins. And so in the comments, it was like, oh, where'd you
I
get that
kind of
black
like
Perkins?
the original Synth tracks that they did like this cream color. It looks like a 90s computer or something. I kind of like that too.
Yeah, I think the Syntrex, that's, and given its historical sort of derivation and all that, you sort of go, well, yeah, that's an unusual sort of instrument and it's got its history and all that sort of stuff. But this is an original invention and it's Erica Synth, it should be black. And I know for sure, absolutely, they're going to do a black one. Of course they're
Yeah.
going to do a black one. And then I'll be in a real bind because I'll go, I've got to have the black Perkins. And then you go, am I stupid enough to sell this, take a big hit and rebuy the same machine? And I suspect I might be, but, so that'll be terrible. But it should be black. Anyway,
I don't know.
it's a great machine.
That's a good question. I don't know if I would go through all that just to change the color. I'd probably just, or
Yeah.
I'd bug the hell out of Erica to just send me a new chassis, and I would replace it myself.
Yeah, I've done that on some pedals, actually, like the Dig. I hated the Dig delay because it was pink, even though my daughter said, don't get rid of that one, it's pink, I love it.
Give her the chassis.
But all the guts are actually on the chassis, so you can't just,
Oh, I see.
maybe you,
Actually, we're talking about drum machines. This is not actually a drum machine. It's a drum synth, but it's something I have new here. I just uploaded the build video for this guy.
oh, yep, saw that. Waiting for the demo one now.
So I built this thing by myself. and man, it was quite a project, I have to tell you. But
Oh,
it's this is the Michigan Synthworks clone, and it's absolutely. I actually owned an original Concussion for a little while. It didn't. I bought it for like $40 at a flea market here in Mexico, and it didn't quite work. I eventually passed it on to a friend who got it fixed and sold it for quite a profit. Uh, but it's since I had the original and I did try to open it up and fix it. I'm familiar with the innards, and it's absolutely identical. It's the same machine, even down to the noisy voltage regulator. That I mean, things could have been improved, I guess, but that's not the point of something like this. You want it to be identical. And man, is it fun! Does this thing sound good? Um, I'm uh, I'm already trying to think of ways to integrate it with the LXR. Maybe send out MIDI because the LXR doesn't have trigger outs, but I could probably use the regular audio outs in this thing will trigger anyway.
I noticed one thing in that video. Um, when you assembled it, um, the switches did have that dust protection, uh,
Yes.
but the pot meters, the faders didn't.
No, the faders don't, and I'm not sure. I don't remember. That's something I don't remember about the original. If the original had, um,
I think you showed a picture in the video of the original where it was. I saw them.
not on my video, on my
I
because
think that's
I didn't have the original when I made my video.
okay.
Might be thinking of
Could it be a picture from their homepage you showed?
maybe, but they do send you these little discs, felt paper discs that you
Yeah,
put over the switches. So
yeah.
the switches are nice because you only see this like black uh, underneath. You don't see any circuitry or any mechanical. But yeah, the faders don't have that. It would be nice if the faders would have that somehow to keep the dust out. But I don't think the original had dust protection for the faders either. Because I mean, Haraf did an amazing, meticulous job of cloning. Each part. He even had some parts remanufactured. I think the switches, he had to find a factory to actually make them to the specifications of the original. So it's not, these not off the shelf parts. Not a lot of them are not. I had a few problems with this build. Um, the shafts for the switches that determine the oscillator modes were a little high, and RAF suggests or recommends that you saw off a part of that. And I'm like, oh my god, no, let me just see if I can make
Yeah,
it
I,
fit
I
without
saw
sawing
that
it up.
bit. I saw that bit in the video, and you're trying to stuff it back into the chassis, and then you said, "Oh, and they recommend that you saw off the ends." And I go,
Yeah, and you
"What?
know what? I didn't
After all that work, then what do they want? They want you to get out there with a hacksaw or a grinder or something,
Yeah,
do
you
they?
should do it before you solder them in, and definitely do it because mine broke. One of my switches
Yeah.
broke one of the times, and I had to send my machine back to Raf, and he was kind enough. Of course, he's not going to do that for every client. I'm a partner making a promotional video, so he replaced it for me. He replaced the switch for me and sent it back. But yeah, it literally broke off at some point when I was trying to squeeze it in. So you definitely got to cut that off with he uses like pliers, like big wire cutters to cut off half of the shaft from the thing. But that's DIY. That's the world of DIY. You have to kind of MacGyver things sometimes.
Well, you'd have to read the instructions first, wouldn't you? Because you wouldn't want to get to the bit after you've assembled it at all, and
Yeah,
then it goes,
exactly. You know,
now,
that's
now
happened to
get
me
out
so
your
many
2-foot
times. Yeah.
bolt cutters.
Sometimes I'm anxious to get started and I'm overconfident because of how much experience I have building things. And I'll just dive right in without reading the manual. And I've had, so many problems because of that. Because you see, there's a step you should have done first, then now you're screwed. Like for the Synth engine build, there's a little switch that you have to mount to an expander board. but you have to cut off all the leads from the switch before you solder it on, because otherwise they touch and short to the board underneath. And I didn't do that, and I realized I had to do that when it was already all soldered in. So now I have to unsolder, and soldering things is pretty easy. Unsoldering things is hell, because no matter how much of you pump out that solder or use the soldering braid, it's always still stuck there. So you end up having to destroy the part, like cut it out and replace it with a new one. And then once I did that, I broke some traces on the PCB. So then I had to be like looking at the schematics and measuring connections with the multimeter to see which ones got broken so that I could make a bridge, and which ones shorted so that I could cut the trace. Oh, and then all of a sudden, like the whole build would have taken you 4 hours, and now you're 16 hours in because of not reading the instructions.
This is the bit
But
on
then I
the
usually
behind.
these mistakes. I include these mistakes as in my videos. I like people to see where I fucked up so they can learn from my mistakes as well. I don't want to seem like I never make any mistakes. Part of the idea is exactly to show them where I fucked up so they don't fuck up.
Well, then you'd feel better too, wouldn't you? I mean, there's nothing worse than watching something and it all seems effortless, and then you go to do it and you go, oh, well, that didn't work, and that didn't work, and that didn't work. And let's talk about another great drum machine. This is a machine in the, that club of devices which you buy and then you sell and then you buy it again. Well, I've done this one twice. I've bought and sold this twice. That's the Division Department 014. It's probably the worst name ever devised. I'll just play a tiny bit of the sound.
I'm not familiar with that one.
Yeah, it's a perfect circuit video. It doesn't have a sequencer or anything. It's just 4 voices, so it's like
like the syncussion.
So it does weird stuff, but
It sounds
it's
great.
it's a beautiful machine, but it has a couple of, obviously it doesn't have any way to sequence it. It's as ugly as hell. Well, I think it's as ugly as hell. It looks like some sort of bathroom thing.
I think it kind of looks like
hospital
Oberheimisch.
thing,
Kind of looks like a SEM kind of machine.
and the writing here is really small at the top with all the little switches. You sort of memorize what's going on. It's not too bad. But, but the real problem is that some of the functions you can really only get to if you've got a MIDI controller. And if you're not careful, you can get some of these things into this weird sort of cross-modulated state. And you sort of go, oh, get out of that, get out of that. And unless it's hooked up to a MIDI controller, you sort of go, yes, you think, oh, okay, I got to flick that up, and then I got to press that, and then I turn it back down again, and I'm free, I've got that voice back again. So it's pretty tedious, but it's got a great sound.
Sounds really good.
It's almost like a sort of Simmons. The toms are a bit Simmonsy. So, but they're often going in and out of stock, but anyway, that's the club of machines that I've bought twice. But,
This is
everybody's got a couple of them, I'm sure.
This is a little techno box I put together, and it's got the endorphins sequencer, the ground control, which is kind of like a racked version of a BeatStep Pro, right? Pretty much. And my whole drum thing is the LXR module, which I think is great. That was a great idea by Erica Synth as well, to put the engine without a sequencer.
How does that compare to the box unit, you reckon?
It sounds the same. It's the same exact sound engine. So,
But ergonomics and CV wise, or?
Yeah, I have my dusting brush, my Bifaco dusting brush here.
I've got my own dusting brush. Look, there it is.
There you go.
It's a little paintbrush.
But the Bifaco is static free, and anyway, that's enough advertising for Bifaco.
But this is a detailed paintbrush with longer bristles. Hey,
There
we
you
could do a whole show about dust.
Yeah, we should do the next talk. It should be about brushes. Um, anyway, I have a question for you guys. What was your first drum machine, or first notable drum machine like that you actually used consistently?
I built my own um,
Wow.
from an electronics magazine. So I had to play it manually. Um, um, Sadly, I don't have it anymore because I would like to connect it to what I have now. Um, but uh, that was the sounds I always remembered, and the sounds I needed, and the LXR is closest to what that could do.
Nice.
So that's one of the reasons.
Is it kind of like the things Kraftwerk used in the beginning that they made themselves, like these?
Yeah, it was the snare and the bass drum which was the best, and the hi hats which was really analog. Uh, and, and that sound disappeared in the mid '80s, I think, and that was sad. Um, um, but my first drum machine with MIDI, that was the TR-505, and it was an okay machine, but also terrible.
That was the first one I had. Well, it wasn't mine, but my cousin had it and it lent it to me for a while. So yeah, the 505 was also my first approach to programming beats on a dedicated machine.
Yeah. Yeah.
How about you, Richard? Which was your first?
Well, the 606 and 808 belonged
Right.
to other people in the band, but the first machine that I bought that I absolutely loved, I mean, we had the drumulator, but you know, it had its technical limitations. We had the drum tracks, which was really good. I got a picture of the drum tracks here. So that was a great machine. We used that one a lot. But the one I think I really liked the best was, where is it? No, not there. Oh, not there. Oh, there it is. Sequential Circuits Tom. This is a fantastic machine. Absolutely loved it. And it had so many great features. You could pan things left or right. It had parameter locks. It had cartridges of sounds. It had, I think, resolution up to 96. And
I think
So you
David
could-
Bowie had one, but it was scaled to major. Oh, bad joke.
oh no. Anyway, it's a beautiful machine. I'm going to play
Planet
2
Earth
seconds
to
of it.
major. Oh.
This will stop you
It's
singing.
fine. Time signature the same as. So as you can
That's a great sound. I'm trying to
Yes.
think the one
Very
when I-
80s.
when I finished college, I went to University of Miami for jazz, and then to the New England Conservatory for contemporary improvisation, just crazy experimental music. And when I finished school, I convinced my dad to give me some money to invest on a home studio to start learning production, because I wasn't going to make any money playing free jazz, you know. And so I put together a list of stuff, and what was the drum machine that I wanted at the time was a Boss. I think it's the 202. It was this black machine with orange writing on it. It was super noisy, and already it was kind of the trend that Roland does now, where they're rehashing their old sounds. So this one was already kind of bringing back some sounds from Roland's history. What was it called? Boss 202 drum machine.
Oh, I remember.
Oh
I
yeah,
also
that's the DR 202.
yeah, DR, Dr. Ridden.
Dr.
I have the
Will.
110 too.
There you go. So that thing, I actually like. It had a little LCD. It wasn't even backlit, It was a little LCD, and it was hell to program that thing. You had to step edit and to be able to create ratchets and interesting things. What it did have that was cool was a filter, a delay. So it was kind of already into that rave, uh, you know, uh, era where people were filtering their drum beats and things like that, and it served me well for a couple of years. I used it to make demos of my earliest songs, and I had the SP808, but the SP808 was not a drum machine. It's a phrase sampler. It was never meant to have one hits. You were supposed to sample entire phrases because it only had 4 voice polyphony. It was reading straight from the zip drive. So it was never meant to have like a kick drum and a snare. You could do that, I guess, but it would click. You would have memory problems. So I don't consider that a drum machine at all. Rather, I would program drum machine and then record loops from my drum machine into that machine. But then when I moved back to Brazil in 1999, I got an MPC 2000 XL, and that was probably my favorite drum machine ever that I've ever had. I think I even like it better than my MPC one that I have now, because there's something about the limitation. The MPC one has synths in it. It has it's a whole DAW in the box, but the 2000 XL really um, made you focus on sampling, creating a really cool palette of sounds, and then creating just beats with it. And I miss it a lot. Back then, I wasn't into DIY, and I sold it cheap because the display was broken. Had I known what I know today, I would have just gotten a new display for it and continue rocking it. I might at some point buy a used 2000 XL just for the nostalgia of it. But yeah, that changed my life. That really made me get into programming, drum machine programming for real. And I did that for years. I was a hip hop producer in Brazil for the early noughts, for a lot of very important records. And yeah, I still miss that machine. That was my favorite.
Yeah, what do you think of there's the two ways of programming the old drum machines, isn't there? I mean, a lot of them had that 16-step grid, which a lot of them, of course, still do. But a lot of the other machines, you had to input in real time. So they didn't have any sort of grid. So you just
Uh-huh.
select, oh, well, two bars, 4 bars, put it on the metronome, and you play it in live with some sort of incoming quantization, which I
That's
think in
always
some
been
ways
my
is.
choice. That's always because I'm an actual, performing musician. So I could always come up with a beat in seconds on the MPC, because I would just hit the metronome, hit record, and just go boom boom bat, and it would automatically quantize what I just played, but it would keep the dynamics, which I think is what gives it the human factor. When you do a double bass drum and that first hit is a little softer than the second one, or when you record a hi-hat pattern, even if it's quantized, the fact that each hi-hat hit is a little louder or softer than the next really gives it this dynamic contour that makes it feel much more human. So I know a lot of people like to use the MPC J Dilla style without quantization. I didn't like that because I wanted my beats to be quantized, but at the same time, the dynamic variation from the performance kept the human feel. And 'cause, I mean, I think it's a mistake when people say that it's more human when the rhythm isn't precise, because a good human drummer is very precise. Like if you analyze like a Steve Gadd drum part, it's metronomical. Motherfucker is a machine. What really gives it the human feel is much more the dynamics, right? Sometimes there's something about the feel of the rhythmic subdivision that is not straight, but it's still consistent. right? So like a samba pattern, for example, it won't have those straight 16s. There's a certain kind of swing to it, but it's the same throughout. You can make a template out of that. But what gives it the human feel is the dynamics, and also the timbral variation. Like from a hi-hat, when you have your foot keeping the hi-hat closed, but you're kind of, slightly opening it so that it still sounds closed, but a little bit more open at different parts of the beat. That gives it a whole contour that makes it much more interesting hi-hat beat. And how hard you hit it and where you hit it, all those things make it human. Sometimes
Yeah, all the subtle modulations, of course. But I remember there was one record we did, and it was all drum machine. And we're in the studio, and the producer guy's going, he wasn't happy with the kick, and so he got up. He had some beautiful sampler there. Actually, it might have been one of the old Akai's. Anyway, just got up this very nice bass drum, and he said to my co-music partner at the time, he said, "Come on, you play in the bass drum." So over the entire song, he manually played a velocity sensitive bass drum, just as a single take all the way through it. Did first take, played all the way through, and it actually worked. And that's what went on to the single. So it
yeah,
was all drum machine with a continuously finger played bass drum all the way through. So I
yeah.
thought that was pretty interesting, really.
I've used these hybrid methods a lot. Like sometimes for my productions, I'll play, with the keyboard. I'll play the kick and snare, and that'll allow me to quantize and then to edit the velocities and make that kick and snare line really perfect. And then I'll sit on the drums and just do the hi hat. And just having that human played hi hat line gives it the variation and the nuance that makes it more interesting. Also, when you're just playing the hi-hat on Pro Tools, you have elastic time. You can quantize that performance and still maintain the timbral variation and the dynamic contour, but keep the keep the metronomic precision, right? Sometimes I'll even do that with the whole drum set, and I found a technique. Look, I'm working on it and I'm getting better, but I'm not a super precise drummer. I'm far from Steve Gadd, right? So what I'll do is I'll play, but I won't play any cymbals, because what happens is when you engage time correction on Pro Tools or whatever software you're using, the cymbal sound, if it gets time compressed or expanded, it goes to shit. It's such a complex sound that no algorithm to date is able to do it without making it sound horrible. So what I'll do is I'll do a take of just kick, hi-hat, and snare, and then I can quantize that, and it won't sound bad. It will sound good, and it will maintain the timbral variation, it will maintain the dynamic contour of what I played, but it'll fix my timing inaccuracies. And then on top of that, I will play a track of cymbals, where I'll hit a crash here, or I'll go to a ride for a little while, and then uh, it'll sound like the whole drum set was played at once with a very accurate articulation, but it's studio trickery. But it's a nice trick to use. If you want to quantize your drummer, tell him to play a take with no cymbals first, and then you can quantize it freely and not have it sound like shit.
When we talked about our first drum machines, I forgot to mention this one before the 505. Um,
All right, that's a
uh,
metronome almost.
yeah, I love the clap in this one and the bass drum. Uh, that's yeah, and the hi hats, not the cymbal.
It
Um,
looks like a Casio calculator in a way. It's kind of cool.
yeah, but it really has the old analog sound sampled. It's very. I think it was sampled, but I'm not
I think
sure.
so too. I think this is already
Yeah,
early digital.
yeah, yeah. But But I remember I made a modification to it so I could check the clock out and use in other equipment. Um, uh, and by that time it was easy to get manuals from Roland and Boss. You just called them and they sent them. So service manuals, so it was easy to modify.
That's cool.
All those old machines are all 8-bit. I didn't even realize until years and years afterwards that they were all 8-bit. And, 8-bit equals poor resolution, blah, blah, blah. Of course, now people say, beautiful grit and all that sort of stuff. But, it's funny because now I look at some things and they go, like is it the Liven gear, and it's all 8-bit, and I sort of think, I don't really want to go lo-fi. But then all the machines that I loved back in the day all turn out to be 8-bit machines. The drum tracks was 8-bit, and the sequential circuits tom was 8-bit, and so many of those things were all 8-bit. But nothing struck me at the time. Never at the time did I think, oh, that's low res or that's lo-fi.
It's good enough. If you talk about dynamic range, analog tape is 8-bit or even less, So it's 8-bit is good enough for most sound. Most digital sounds, for especially one hits for on a drum machine, I think it's fine. Which were the first machines that went beyond that, like 12 or 16-bit? I think the EMU, the SP1200, that was already 12-bit, wasn't it? Or was it still 8?
I can't remember. It was around 1985 that the 12-bit became or came. It was around that time, 85, 86, and shortly after 16 bits.
Yeah, here I opened up the Wikipedia page on the SP1200, and indeed it's 12-bit. 12-bit, 26.04 kilohertz. What a weird kilohertz. What a weird sample rate.
There were no standards back then.
26.04 kilohertz. It's not 26, it's 26.04. Weird. And yeah, it is 12-bit samples. I think the original DX7 had a 12-bit DAC too, so 12-bit was quite a thing at that period.
Yeah, I think my EPS was 12-bit. I think the original EPS, that was a beautiful machine. I love that. Use that for drums a lot.
Nice. And now, what's ironic is that back then that was the limitation, and every manufacturer wanted to have, beat the sample rate. And now we're all trying to emulate those 12-bit and 8-bit sounds, using samples from back then.
The curse of fashion.
Yeah. But I heard somebody say, I don't remember who, I'd love to be able to attribute the quote, but whatever makes, it's the defects that give something personality. It's like the limitations are what actually gives something its character. So that's an interesting way to think about it. Like, for example, the 808. The 808 was trying to sound like a real drum set, but it was limited to analog technology. And
didn't get within QE.
Right? We love it because it doesn't try to sound like an actual acoustic kick and snare. Precisely the limitations that stopped it from reaching a realistic sound are what make it interesting and fun to use and have defined entire genres.
I see one of the comments there talking about the Ensoniq Mirage. We had a Mirage. We actually had two Mirages for a while, and I tried to sample into it for a while. God, hexadecimal, that was just awful. But anyway, I remember one gig we were playing, and there was a Mirage, and hitting the drums. I think it was like an Art of Noise samples on the Mirage, And the other keyboard player in the band was just hitting the Mirage going, just finger drumming. Anyway, the crowd was loving it. And I thought, oh no, he's just improvising between songs. We've got nowhere to go. But I remember it really well because it was some of the best drums we seemed to have on the night. Was just finger drumming on the
Look at
Mirage.
Henrik has his Mirage out.
Yeah, it needed to get some air.
He's flashing as the circuit board.
It looks.
Ah! Get away!
That's the kind of thing you usually have to censor.
Yeah.
Unclothed synths.
At least no animals ran out.
Inappropriate.
Does it still boot up? I wonder.
It did 2 years ago, so I think it's
As recent as that.
Yeah. So I think it's working. It's only the keys which are a bit terrible with the different velocity. It's the only problem it has. I'll put it in place.
Sorry for being so late, guys. I had a very late night studio session and didn't get home until the wee hours of the morning.
It's okay, man. We understand.
Oh,
We were talking about our first drum machines. Which was your first drum machine, Ken?
First drum machine
The first
would
one
have
you
been an
actually used.
Alesis.
Oh, the SR16?
Yes. And I got that because a band across the street from me. I mean, technically, I used a Casio keyboard before that for as a drum machine, but that
Yeah.
didn't quite count.
Yeah, I used the Yamaha PSS 480.
This would have been like it wasn't. Well, I had an SK1 was my first ever synth, and that had some drums on it. But in like for using in a band and whatnot, I had a SR16 that a metal band that lived across the street from me had. And I loved how it sounded through their PA system so much that I was like, man, I got to have one of these. And I didn't have a drummer who was, well, he was like me. He wasn't punctual. so yeah.
Remember the first ads for drum machines were like, yeah, it won't hit on your girlfriend. It won't show up late.
Yeah, and that was like a big thing. Like those drum machine ads constantly were like putting down drummers, and I wonder if that's part of the animosity that built up over the years between acoustic drummers and drum machines, because really it was multiple companies doing those sorts of ad campaigns where it was very much like, your drummer is a drunken slob.
I think it was just a joke on the.
Yeah, sure, but it I mean, I can remember later on in life when I had like an MPC and I would do shows with that kind of stuff, and you would constantly get the things of like, oh, drum machines don't have soul, and all these criticisms like that were
Tell that
really,
to Jay Dilla.
Yeah, it was a very unfounded kind of thing that was being spread out there, and it was, I have to believe that people were aware that it was just a tool, like just another instrument to express with, but they were so adamant that like you can't be using this for serious music, and which of course wasn't the case because so many top 10 hits had already been made with like Linn drums and whatnot for many a years before
Used
that.
by real musicians like Prince, for example.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
Are you gonna tell Prince that his drum machine has no soul?
You're not gonna tell Prince crap. But yeah, I had a really I wanted to tell a quick story because I had a really interesting session last night, and it kind of relates. So I was over at Just Blaze's studio, and we were he just got this amazing Moog modular, right? Both the reissue and the new and vintage, and we were kind of sussing it out. And I brought a Buchla up there, the 208C, and so I was sitting there with him and the musical director, and we were kind of giving each other tasks to kind of learn the new workflow with all this stuff there. And one of the tasks was, well, create a kick drum on the Buchla, right? and how realistic and how interesting of like we wanted to use the buchla as a straight up drum machine as opposed to like a melodic device, and
Mm-hmm.
we ended up getting there with it and syncing it and basically using the buchla as the drum machine,
Cool.
which was really interesting in that I I kind of when I was given the task, I was like, "Ooh, I don't know how well this drum is going to come out because it was literally the buchla by itself, not patched into the Moog aside from clocking, right?" And I was like, I don't know how well I'm going to be able to get 2 to 3 lanes going, with this essentially 2 oscillator synth, but we were able to get it going pretty well after a while, modulating timbre on it and FM, and sounded really good.
Yeah, you can take like almost like a DFAM approach with it, right?
Yeah, yeah, and by the end, we were kind of like, man, that's one of like the most powerful kicks that synthesized kicks that we've heard in a while, and but it all came down to like just kind of using your ears and really playing with it because like we tried to kind of dial it in by just looking at it and saying like, okay, like I know where kick parameters generally speaking would kind of be, and what I want
Mm-hmm.
to modulate and that sort of thing, and I kind of set that basic idea up with the patch cables on there, but then it became this thing where it was like, the I'm not generally a Buchla user at all. Like I have plenty of Eurorack and whatnot, but I don't really use Buchla. And that thing is so alien in as far as like, half section of it, the faders are inverted, and the values like down is up and that sort of thing. Um, and it took us a while, and I was like, I got to stop looking at this panel and just use my ears and just kind of like suss it out like that. But no, like I guess the point is that sometimes like some of the most fun drum machines are things that aren't drum machines, and just
Right.
as long as you have a steady clock source and just kind of creating your own sounds, like which is probably why I like the Tempest so much, because like the Tempest is kind of like a blank slate of synthesis for drums, and it's like it doesn't guide you where you're trying to go.
Right. Well, in a way, the LXR fits that idea too, because it's the drum synth
Yeah.
first and foremost. With the sequencer built in, you can, even though the voices are kind of tailored to particular kinds of sounds, like the first three are more for kicks and stuff. There's still so much flexibility that you can go way beyond what their initial intent is.
Yeah, although the ultimate one with that one, I think, has got to be the Perkins,
Right.
because it's some of the choices that they made in that one are quite unusual. I think it's not really a absolute dog standard mix of sounds. I mean, they've been quite extreme in a lot of ways.
Totally. Yeah.
But on that, it's still isn't it still like it's like blocks of like, okay, this is one voice, this is another voice, and it's kind of like constructed to be like, okay, this is this world of sounds here, this is this
Uh-huh.
world of sounds
And
here.
you
Yeah,
trigger.
sort of. The first two are sort of kicky Tommy type
Hmm.
things, and the third one's sort of snary clap, and the fourth one's like noise metal, slow attack stuff. So, but within that,
Yeah, well, I think I
uh,
understand what Ken is talking about, which is where in a bukla or like a DFAM kind of idea, uh, all the elements are kind of interacting together and changing over time. So you're not just triggering different sounds at different spots. When you trigger a sound and it's on the fourth bar and you have that modulation going, it's going to sound different. That same sound, the same voice is going to sound different there than it does in the first part of the
Hmm.
pattern, because of how you have modulation things interacting.
yeah,
And
well,
that's
that would be like
really
a
important.
Basimilus Iteritatis is a
Uh-huh.
classic for that one, isn't it?
The
But
pulsar, I think, is another example of that kind of interactivity between the voices. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I think uh, I've just thought of another, like, I don't know if we all are into modulars as well, but I've been getting into some of Euclidean ideas a lot too, like the new syncussion. The first thing I did with the syncussion once I got it built was to hook it up to some of my Rebel Technology Euclidean rhythm generators. And man, was that fun, you know. And then when you put that together with the sound generation also being, uh, you know, with cross modulations and feedback patching and all that, and you can get to some really interesting complex rhythms, but that are also danceable, you know, also relatable. Have you guys played around with Euclidean rhythms at all?
A bit. Uh, I have so my modular behind me that you can kind of barely see.
Yeah.
Um, Next to that is another case right here in the. I'm mirrored here, so this
Yeah.
case back here is all drums. Like that's all that's for. Is it? I leave it patched. It's a modular drum machine.
Cool.
Um, and I'll run some Euclidean drums for that. What I've actually found that I like is there's an iPad app. I forget the name of it. I'll have to pull it up. That does
Patterning.
yes, that's it. So I
I'm
use
I'm a
that,
fan of patterning.
and I'll run that out to my modular that way. I don't use a Euclidean sequencer inside of my Eurorack, which I still kind of want to get one, and
Hmm.
but I've had them in different instances in my life, and they kind of keep getting cycled out. What I really love is I have a Trigger Riot, and that thing is so. Part of the reason why I built my modular drum machine is because I specifically didn't want it to be a regular drum machine. Like I have a Tempest, I had
Hmm.
two rhythms, I've got the Impact and
You have
the
an
regular drum
EMPC?
brute. So lots of different drum machines. But modular is great for like happy accidents and just weirdness, and that's where the Trigger Riot I think really excels. Is you can get lots of probability and really interesting changes moving. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll set that up as the drum sequencer, or I'll set that up as a trigger source to envelopes and other pieces. So I may actually clock it with, say, a Beat Step Pro, which is going to give me
Hmm.
just very basic drum machine patterns where I can finger drum it in and it will play that. But then that is clocking a Trigger Riot, which is adding variety to the sound and kind of evolving it over time.
Cool. I think I do similar things with my 4MS. I had the QCD with the quad pingable LFO and the QCD expander. And since it gives you four subdivisions of the clock that are voltage controllable,
Mm-hmm.
when you send like random voltages to the clock divisions and send those to voices, it's another way to create generative kind of interesting rhythms that is not Euclidean anymore, but it's not completely dissimilar.
Do you guys do you guys prefer to use like specific modules for each sound every time, or do you tend to cycle between different ones? Or so like
I often
Yeah,
for your kick, do you have like a signature sound that's your kick that you always tend to gravitate to, or
It goes
snare and
through phases. Like for a while, I had my main performance case. I was using the the Ericsson's LXR module for everything except for the kick, and then all my bass voices, my synth voices, everything would go into the Ghost, the Endorphins Ghost, which is kind of an output processor. It gives you compression, distortion, but it also has sidechain. And there's an output for the envelope that it
mm-hmm.
generates. So what I would do is I would send my kick drum trigger from the sequencer to the Ghost, and that would that would do uh, the ducking,
Yep.
right? And then I would use just a simple Bifaco Pony VCO as my kick drum going after the Ghost, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that didn't. And what's cool about that is that when you change the envelope on the Ghost for the ducking, it also changes the length of your kick drum proportionally, right? And I love having just an oscillator be my kick drum because I'm very quickly, depending on the venue and the tempo that I'm playing at, the type of rhythm and the sound system and the venue, I can fine tune that kick pitch to what works best. Whereas I feel like if I use like dedicated kick drum module, uh, things are a little bit more complex.
Hmm.
But with just I like kicks that are simple. It's just an oscillator with an envelope for pitch and an envelope for amplitude, and that's it. And I found that to be a really cool solution to just have that simple oscillator be my kick and have it going after the ducking. Uh, I don't think I even have any dedicated kick drum modules anymore. I used to have the kick call, the Bifaco kick call,
Mm.
and it was a cool module, but I didn't love it to death, so I ended up letting it go.
Yeah, I did the same thing. It
Yeah,
felt a bit had a sort of funny resonance to it. I thought
yeah,
it just wasn't crispy enough for me, but
yeah.
I
You
I
guys
tend to
have
mean,
the
use a
it's fine.
cinnamon?
different.
I know a lot of people who swear by it and love it. It just wasn't my taste personally. For snare drum, I really like the Kraken,
Mm.
which is the where is it? Where's my Kraken? Well, the Kraken is physical modeling, right? And they did a really intense job of and analyzing a real snare drum and giving you all those parameters. But it just doesn't crack the way that a real snare drum cracks when you hit it with a stick, with a 2B
Yep.
stick on the rim shot. So I like it for its acoustic qualities and also for voltage controlling the sounds and getting it to go different directions. But it doesn't give me that fucking backbeat snap that I want. So I use it in conjunction with other modules. Like I have the Eric Synth simple analog clap, for example, has more of that. So I'll layer them together.
Yeah,
Sometimes,
layering is
yeah.
massive for me. Yeah.
Nah, it's the key, man.
Yeah, and I've always treated even like my being on an MPC, I would always stack my drum samples. I'd stack at least three pads, and I would
Yeah.
always layer it like here's my low, here's my midsection, and here's my high.
And that's a great way to get original sounds too, because if
Yeah,
you just use one snare sample, that's recognizable. But if you use like one snare sample from this record, then you pitch down another from another and add that, and then you get another one that's kind of stereo. And by the time you have your full stack sounding, you have something that doesn't sound like any of the original snares anymore.
yeah, and I found that like even so like I would resample that a lot of the time. So like if I got something that I really like, I would resample it. But
Right.
that was more for like storing for later use. But in the actual productions that I would do in actual beats, I would always keep it separate because I found that something kind of happens to the dynamic when you sample it all together. No matter how
You
I
make
do
it
it.
static, right?
Well, and there's also certain drum machines do weird things with timing, right? So even if you have everything hitting on the one, right?
There will be a
Some
slight difference, and then the sample will trigger a little bit before or after, and that'll change the overall sound.
So this is one of the things that I was actually just discussing yesterday. That's why I was like, man, I really wanted to be on the show. So I'm so sorry for being late. It really hurts me. But so uh, while I was in the studio session the other day, I was digging out some monitors out of a closet, and so Justin has his 4000s up there, and these are the 4000s that he produced like all of Jay-Z's hits and all that stuff on, right? And so like the fanboy in me is kind of like looking at it like, ooh. So the conversation always comes back to the MPC 4000 and its timing, and the
Hmm.
way that the internal engine on that works is it speaks MIDI, right, at MIDI
Right.
speed inside of there. And what happens is if you hit two drums on the exact same moment in time, it will actually stagger them by a tick, right?
Hmm.
So you never have that exact like stack. It doesn't work that way. It will always like just ever so slightly give it that slight offset, right? Even though it you can barely hear it, it's
So
there,
which one
right?
gets priority? Is
Uh,
there a logic to the priority?
yeah, I believe it has to go with first note number, and then I think the other one was
Guys, I need a 3 minute water and bathroom break. I'll
yep.
be right back.
I believe it has to do with like whichever pad is master as well. But I have to go back and see if I can get some information on that to be exact. Um, I don't like ever putting out information that I'm a little suspect on. But yeah, so that stuff will slightly stagger, and that's one of the sounds that I think is really hard to kind of replicate if you don't think about it. So when I'm using like the S2400 or something, one of the things I like about that is on an MPC, I always tend to be very surgical about how I do my drums, right? Like overly surgical to the point where like I'm, if it's an MPC or a machine, whatever it is, I tend to slice very much on the transient, and I get like I try to leave some air at the back end, but usually my transient I'm very much up against the transient, right? Whereas on the older machines, I used to always push it, right? So it would just be like a little bit more sloppy where you would have some air, and that would cause like some kind of timing fluctuations to happen there, right? But on the S2400, I don't like to do that. Like I work the exact opposite way. I'm very like, I'm free and happy with whatever comes out of the machine because it just sounds so good on its own. So I tend to just like, I'll use the faders for chopping stuff up as opposed to dialing it in perfectly and then slicing it. And that air and space really kind of lends itself in a way to give you these stacks that kind of move and whatnot, because you could still stack pads on that thing as well. You can trigger multiple pads and do that sort of thing. So yeah, like having incorrect and slightly less accurate timing of samples, I think goes a long way for taking out that whole drum machines don't have soul thing, because it's like you're putting in these ghosts and happy accidents. And tick as in 1 bit in MIDI, I don't know. I just know it as a MIDI tick is the best way I can describe it. It's like the finest timing division you can get in MIDI on those. It probably is 1 bit. I don't know.
So is that 2400? Is that 2400 kind to you?
What's that?
Is that 2400 kind to you? I sort of hear mixed reports about it.
Oh, I love it. I absolutely love it. It's my favorite sampler that I've ever used, period. And so there are, I also really like the Force. I've got the Push 3 here, and like I use lots of different stuff, but there is, so like the 2000 XL is what I really lived on for many years before getting a machine and then working with Native Instruments to hopefully make that thing as good as possible, and then moving on to other stuff after that. But like so I love the 2000 XL. Like there's a lot about the 2000 XL that I really love, but I hate that you can't sample while the sequencer's playing on the 2000 XL, and that is exactly one of the things that fixes. So the 2400, in my opinion, is kind of like a 1200. Like if we stopped in time around the period of like the 2000 XL, and there was like a split in the timeline, and you know how people are constantly saying today that like we're in the weird timeline now. Well, if this was in the right timeline, like it's like if there was a split and the 1200 evolved along the lines of like seeing what the 2000 XL did and did it right and kind of like did that stuff. That's what it feels like to me, because you get that waveform display, and you can do a lot. You can do the time stretching, and you can do a lot of that stuff, but it still very much feels like hardware, and it still very much feels like it has a character and a sound to it, where a lot of the newer gear, they're all very transparent, which is beautiful because they have so many effects inside of them that you can shape the character how you want. But the 2400 is the first machine that I've heard in a really, really long time where as soon as you play it and hear it, it instantly stands out amongst any of my new gear. Like I instantly can say like, oh, that's the 2400 right there. Like it, and it's not just about trying to sound like a 1200. It has its own sound. Like it definitely is its own beast. And I absolutely adore it for that. That plus the workflow of, like I said, like I don't overthink it when I'm on it. I don't get super, super surgical with that thing. Like I like to just kind of make a beat on it when I'm chopping samples, when I'm chopping breaks. Like I don't overthink at all on that thing. Whereas most of my other gear has so much depth to it Like even if I'm on like the Force or something to that effect, or even the MPCs, I just overthink it too much. Like I will make these drum patterns that are so nonsensically complex just because I can, and it's the way that I'm used to working, that sometimes it's like, dude, just throw a break in that thing and chop it up. Like, you know what I mean? Like, just get dirty with it and move on. So
Is that
yeah,
the machine? Is that the machine directing you? Is that the machine ergonomics sort of drifting you into that
a,
direction?
a bit, yeah. Like so, like the fader aspect of it is great because it's just like you feel like you're already on the mixing board, so you're just kind of like, oh, I can just boom throw it up and kind of perform live with it, and it's great. The other aspect of it is, so while the screen, in my opinion, like people kind of complain about small screens on tech and whatnot, and its screen is not huge. I mean, it's what, maybe 2.5 inches, 3 inches, somewhere around there. Um, but
You really need more on that machine, though.
yeah, like I try not to even look at the screen too much. Like the
Mhm.
screen, and the screen is very nice, and the way it's laid out, in my opinion, is very easy to read. But like, it's one of those machines where I really enjoy the fact that, like, use your ears. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, does it sound good? Whereas, and the placement of it being slightly off to the right. Whereas on like a 2000 XL push, all those things, like, the screen is like front and center, and it's like yelling at you, look at me. You know what I mean? Whereas on this, I feel like I'm more like just working as, here's a drum break that I've chopped up. Here's some sounds that I've chopped up. Throwing those to the pad. You've got the ability to do things where you can pitch shift to BPM, right? So I love that kind of thing where I can just quickly throw something in and I'm like, okay, it needs to be adjusted a little bit. I'm not going to overthink it. I'm just going to adjust it to the correct BPM, maybe have some slices in there, let that run, and then the rest is like live looping, because my my production style these days has kind of changed from where I was much younger, where it was a lot heavier of vinyl record sample chopping. Now I may still use some of that, but a lot of it is I'm using Jupiters and modular and stuff. So I'm creating these loops, and I don't really have to chop them up as much as I used to. So live looping has become a big part of my workflow, and having that integrated right into your drum machine is like, it just speeds up your workflow so much more.
Hey Ken, quick question, because
Hmm.
I've been the same thing happened to me. I used to use a lot more samples. It was a big part of what I did, sampling from
Hmm.
vinyls and stuff. And now I almost like make my own like vinyl records to sample from. Like
Exactly.
I'll play everything and I'll sample myself.
100%. Yep.
Is for you, was it a matter of the hassle of licensing, or
No, it was never that. Um, I never really, like, I mean, it was more a mental thing of like, I want to be like,
more
so
in
there is
control?
a massive amount of art to sampling and chopping up records that already existed and making them your own and all that, and I don't
Hmm.
downplay that even in the slightest amount.
Right.
But for me, in on a personal level, there was always this like, I'm not that good, that kind of thing, like a lot of
Mhm.
self-depreciation going on. And
You were still using like somebody else's
yeah, yeah, yeah,
original
yeah. So,
idea.
and that kind of like always eats at me just a little bit. So like when I do sample, like the beats that I create that are heavily sampled versus the beats that I create that are heavily sampling myself, I tend to feel a different energy about them. Like a personal connection wise. I can still listen to my old ones that are like really, really heavily sampled, and like, okay, I know that record and it brings back these fond memories of record digging for that record, that kind of thing. But there is something about, when I'm like, and a lot of times I will blend the two, but a lot of the times I feel this connection to the music where I'm like, oh, like I found this happy accident, and I love the way that this frequency kind of pops out here, and like that it's 100% me and that kind of thing. So
I
there's a
think
lot of
there's a
that.
bit of a trade-off because I feel like I gain something when I do it like we're doing now. Let's say, I will be playing around, jamming and overdubbing myself and come up with a few bars of something funky that I can then sample as if it were a record. And the fact that it's original, that I've played that, there's value to that, and it makes me feel good. But on the other hand, there's something that comes from an original sample from a record. There's like the
Yeah,
soul
no,
of
for
the
sure.
moment, of the period. Like something that you sample from the 60s brings the 60s in with it,
Exactly.
in the texture of the sound, in a way that's beyond just the musical ideas that are in there. And I feel like that's an element that's lacking. And I've tried to replicate it, right? Put
We all
some
do.
vinyl crackles, tape simulator and stuff to make it sound more like a real record, and it still doesn't
And
have
that's
it.
one thing that I don't
It's
do.
a ghost.
That's
It's
one thing I
something
don't do is I don't tend to use too much of like fake
degrading,
vinyl
right?
crackle and stuff like that. Like there's an element to it, but one thing in the more recent years that I've found that I'm kind of a fan of is so there's certain noises and whatnot that happen in our own studios that we're constantly fighting against, right? So like modular has a high noise floor. It just does, right?
Right.
And I've started to kind of get into the idea of like use that noise floor, like let that be your vinyl crackle. Let these other
Oh yeah,
things,
totally.
you know what I mean? So like I started doing things where
That's
like I
switching
would
to ply wine. Let it.
so like I'll use the compressors and stuff like what is it Hue from Modbap, right? Is
Hmm.
great for this where I can use the compressor in that and kind of boost the individual spaces. So like there's air in between, the musical notes that are coming through, and I'll kind of, boost those up in between, and like I'll do like the opposite of what I should be doing. And sometimes that stuff is really really fun and inspiring because then I'm like, oh, like there's that dirty missing element,
That
but it's
texture.
not fake. It's not
What
like,
what do we replace the tape hiss with nowadays? Because it's
oh my
amazing.
god, like I get so much saturation coming through like overdriven VCAs and stuff. Like, I'll do that kind of thing where just having things boosted like that can kind of, and then I'll use a really smooth filter like the Mankato filter. I can use that on the end and then just kind of
Yeah,
take off a little bit of
the
the
hard
highs
tape.
in that way, and I love doing that kind of
And
stuff.
that gives you so much freedom too, to not be so concerned with noise floor anymore and rather use it creatively. Like here, I've never actually had like proper soundproofing in my studio.
Hmm.
So I live in the woods. It's pretty quiet. There's not a lot of noise from cars and stuff. So, but there's birds and there's dogs and wind and tree branches, and that all gets in. I use very sensitive microphones. Sometimes I'm singing softly or I'm playing an acoustic guitar. That shit gets in there. And I know my engineer gods who trained me to be strict and to have like perfect soundproofing and not let anything bleed in, and I've learned to let go of that part. And it doesn't. First of all, you can barely hear it in context.
Yeah.
Once everything else is in there, there's a bird singing in my vocal take. You can barely hear it, and if you
Yeah.
can, how cool is that? It's a
In
bird
Exactly.
in
Like
singing
there's
in
along with
fifty
how many
you.
in
You know?
records
50
do you
years,
know?
Like I've gone to sessions where like free jazz sessions that were recorded in woods like this, where they would put a microphone outside to get the fucking crickets into the musicians' headphones, where as they improvising. So I know it's not about drum machines anymore, is it?
Yeah, but it kind of is though,
It's
because
okay.
that's one of the things about drum machines that it's like it always comes back to when you're using acoustic drums versus a drum machine. Like these are the elements that get lost in that translation. So it's like, how do you dial back in that soul, like that soul of the recording? When we use synthesizers, when we use drum machines, we're always playing with like reverb and trying to make things sound like they're in a space and that kind of thing. And that's all part of it. It's like,
Bring back the ghost.
yeah, you know.
That's right.
I see Henrik's got his 404 up here.
Ah,
Yeah.
that's like the evolution of the 808 that I was talking about before. Like the
Yeah.
SD 808. This is the better idea.
So, do you guys differentiate between drum machines and samplers at all?
Depends.
Yeah. Samplers, yeah, I do. Um, when I call it a drum machine, I think more about a drum synthesizer. Um,
And sequence.
um, yeah, else it's a sampler. So the Digitakt is a sampler, for example, um, and the LXR2 or one is a synthesizer, drum synthesizer.
Yeah, it's got to be a dedicated machine. It's got to be a dedicated drum machine, because if it's a sampler, then it's a sampler. You put in anything you like.
I
And
think the MPC.
What
Who
what if the
cares?
sampler comes with drum samples already in there?
The MPC, I think, is an example of both.
Hmm.
But then, like the SP808 is a sampler because you're using phrases and
Sure.
sequencing them together. But the MPC is more because it has a deeper sequencer, and so it's more of a machine. Literally, you're triggering each sample, you're just determining velocity and placement and timing. So I think of the MPC as a drum machine as well as a sampler. It definitely
Yeah,
has
I would
that.
agree with that.
But then, like the SP808 is a sampler. It's not a drum machine. But the LXR is not a sampler. It doesn't even have sampling engine, but it is a drum machine. So you have crossovers and you have either or.
I can see a court case here, you see, and with the four experts they've brought in, and the defence trying to argue, no, that was a sampler, that wasn't a drum machine. I object. No, it had drum samples in it. So,
Are we getting pedantic?
What would we be if not pedantic synth nerds?
yeah. Enthusiasts.
Yeah, that's my wife has a different term for it.
What are
Yeah,
you?
I would say though, like the modern era of having these very compact drum machines and drum samplers has kind of changed the way that a lot of this stuff is approached, because it used to be, a drum machine was so big, comparatively speaking, obviously much smaller than a drum set, but like in a small bedroom studio, whatever, a drum machine is a chunk of, that's a chunk of desk space, So I was very much a fan of like keeping everything in one box kind of thing, and like maybe I have a synth out here, this out there. And so sampling drum machines were king for me. But nowadays it's like, man, you can literally have like the pocket operator guy, um, this little fella. I mean, you can do your drums on this. It's literally fits in your pocket, and it's a whole, or iPhone, iPad. I've got friends that are currently producing whole albums on iOS, and I'm like, it's a different world now where, there's a lot of amazing software drum machines, and the software synthesis drum machines, software sampler drum machines, all that is super fantastic. So it comes down to, for me, is like, what's the inspiring aspect? Like I love physical interfaces. Like I love software for how complex and cool, and also the fact that you can get ideas in software cheaply made compared to creating a piece of hardware. So you can have, I champion this software all the time. There's a VST called Permutate by Sonic Charge, and I
Oh
highly
yeah, I
recommend
use that
it to-
one. Oh, it's
I
a crazy
recommend
one.
it to everybody,
Yeah.
and it's got different firmwares that you can put into it. Software firmwares that you can put into it and make it into a drum machine, make it into an effect, this and that. But like that sort of thing, I would love to see that in hardware. But the reality is, to do it like that would be quite expensive. Um, so I love the idea of like drum machines that are in software, as long as I can kind of physically control them in an inspiring way. I'll treat them the same.
Yeah, I like the pocket operator you mentioned, and the that hooking up to the microtonic, and then the patinarium, I think, with the microtonic. That was a lot of fun. I spent ages in front of that patinarium for a while when I was all in the box, just cycling through it. It was quite, it was like meditation, Oop, another one. Oop, another one. It's beautiful. I think they've got a new version of that now, haven't they? Beat Space or something?
I think so. I was gonna pull it up, but I got too many windows. Yeah. Yeah. Do you guys use much in the way of like VST drum machines?
Yeah, I use Microtonic and UVI makes a drum computer, I think it's called, um, which is very good too. Also very drum synth like. Um, I like those two, and then I do use a lot of RMX. What is it called? Spectrosonics RMX.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's mostly for beat.
That's cool. That's cool. Yeah.
It's so awesome. So awesome. Yeah, I love that kind
Anyway,
of stuff, man. Just
I used to spend hours on that, and then as soon as you find a one that you really like, you just squirt it straight into your machine, into the microtonic. It's just fantastic. Of course, the trouble is then you end up with about 300 different kits, and they've all got these crazy names. So
When
you've
I'm
got to
at
go
the
through the
computer-
same experimentation to find the one that you liked again.
when I'm at the computer, I fall back to old habits. I don't use drum machines because I see the whole DAW as a drum machine already. So it has all the MIDI. So usually what I do is I loop a bar on Pro Tools, and I'll just move around bits of audio. And as I hear it loop, that's like one way to build a beat, just with audio. Not even using MIDI. Or if I do use MIDI, I can trigger different sounds. But still use the DAW engine itself as the sequencer and drum machine. And then I don't even have to bother transferring. I can just duplicate it right there, convert to
Yeah,
audio.
I used to do that with a lot of contact, a lot of different contact sample sets and orchestral sets and things like that. And I'd load one up and add in a few hits and sort of move a few of them around. Then I'd load in another one and might find something there. And so I'd end up with this sort of giant hodgepodge of
Or
stuff.
even
But
play, perform the whole song. Play kick snare and hi-hat. And the beauty of the MIDI and sampling is that you can then quantize, repeat, and create ratchets and whatnot and reprogram it. But start from a performance. I like doing that a lot. And I know a lot of people take a very programmatic step-by-step approach to drum. But I'll actually perform the entire song, do transitions, even if they come off kind of wrong and they made a lot of mistakes. At least there's a contour of dynamics and kind of tells a story, and then you can make that be metronomical and machine-like and hard if you want later. So that's why I like the DAW, but that's my favorite drum machine is the DAW, because no drum machine gives you this kind of flexibility and freedom to program very meticulous and complex drum parts that follow an entire song.
you see, but now I reckon that your DAW's your sampler, which is why I've never been able to get back into samplers since I had my old EPS, because the DAW's just too good at it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I kind of started doing electronic music on Pro Tools, right? Up to then, I was playing free jazz on acoustic instruments, and then I got hired to make commercials in Brazil on Pro Tools, and I was like, okay, well, how do we do this? You have to kind of solve it quickly, and you're not going to be like picking like the instrument of certain. You just like this is what you have in front of you. You have a DAW, you have all these sounds and samples and sample packs that the studio bought for you, and like let's see what you can do with that, and then you get very quick at doing it that way too. But there's something that is lost, which is the flavor of each particular drum machine sampler that brings with it a little bit of its era and a little bit of the genres that were generated based on those limitations. So then it's fun to go back, which is what my trajectory has been like that, from the DAW and the infinite freedom to start to focus on particular limited methods in order to achieve particular results.
yeah, back in the days when we had very little gear and if we wanted a new bit of gear, we'd have to sell an old bit of gear, and we were cycling through a lot of those drum machines. So the whole set would have to be replaced with the new drum machine as we went through. And so sometimes you'd sort of be crushed because the old drum machine used to have, a certain thump or a certain flavour. And you get the new drum machine and it's a bit lighter or a bit weaker or a bit, it would just change the whole mood of the whole thing. So, yeah.
So what would each of you pick as like your best drum machine?
MPC.
MPC? Okay. Which one though? You got to be specific.
Okay, I'm split between my old 2000 XL and the one that I have in use now, which I'm happy with too. So the thing is, if I think of the one as just a better 2000 XL, if I don't use the synths, if I don't try to use it as a DAW, if I just use it like I use an MPC, then it's the perfect MPC. Like people have complaints about the MPC one, but most of them have to do with new things that have been added on that expand its functionality, that are cool to have. But I
Most
still
of those
use
issues
it.
are
I
like
still use it as a drum
dull
machine.
issues.
I use it as a sampling drum machine still.
Yeah.
I don't go into all that, using VSTs in it and stuff. I just transfer the beats I make into the DAW, and then I create and compose the song on the DAW. So for that, I love it. It's my favorite drum machine, the MPC one.
This is mine.
Yeah.
I
have yet to try one.
You have to. You will fall in love. It's so easy to be groovy.
Yeah.
and maybe then when you sample it, you will feel like you're sampling from a record. It's really groovy.
It's great. It's my second favorite.
It's been ages since I've had the feeling I have when I play this one. So it's fantastic. So, but I've only had it for a month, so it may change. But.
What about you, Richard?
I enjoyed a lot of the drum machines from the 80s, the drum tracks, and earlier on I was talking about the Tom. Absolutely adored the Tom. Like if I could get a brand new Tom, like a Behringer Tom, that would probably be my favourite. But I've struggled since I used to do it all in the box, came out of the box, and have absolutely struggled to find a drum machine that I've really liked. Having come out of that, and I was going to go all modular for a while, and I was just about. I got a Korg SQ64, I think, is the sequencer, and I was going to use that. I grabbed
one of those when they were
sequence,
being blown out.
Yeah, and I was going to use that to sequence modular, and I thought, right, that's going to be my drum machine. It's going to be fantastic. I'm going to use a Crater, and I'm going to use a.
I find that thing horribly unintuitive, though.
Yeah, well, I got it. And I hadn't even got it out of the box, and then the LXR came along, and I went, I think the LXR's got to be it. So, I ran out the music shop and said, that SQ that you just sent me, I haven't even opened it. Can I just send it back? So got rid of that and went with the LXR. But
how much is
I've got to admit,
thing? How much is it?
Like 600? I sold the LXR because I had to raise a bit of money for the Perkins, I can only have a certain amount of gear at one time for, I haven't got unlimited space or unlimited money and or unlimited attention. If I've got too many machines, I just flip around from one to the other. Mm-hmm. So, I've really got to try to concentrate on things. So, although funny enough, so the long answer to your question is I'm thinking it's the Perkins.
I guess I'll grab.
But you always hope that it's the one that you've just got, don't you?
I'll grab my favorite. I'll grab the best drum machine ever made. Hold on.
Oh, well, that's a build-up.
Yeah,
best drum machine ever made. Well, does it live in its secret room by itself, does it?
While we wait for Ken, I will play this one.
Comes in two flavors. Two flavors for you. Pick a color. And there's that Tom you wanted.
There you go.
No, I would say
The Isla, no?
no, I would have to say my favorite. I want to avoid saying a sampler, but just because a sampler drum machine is a sampler drum machine. So, like, if I was to just say that, whew, the 2400 is kind of like the peak for me, just for having fun. But that's less about drum programming and drum stuff for me, because it's more like I said, just let it go.
Samples.
So I would have even said machine if we were talking about machine, maybe earlier days of 2.0 and 1.8.2 on it. I don't really like where it's gone these days. It's actually gotten away from what I like. But for me, I probably have to say the Tempest, even though there's a lot that I hate about the Tempest. Like, it's just, to me, that it's a pain in the ass, but it's also beautiful. And, like, you can do this, like, open-ended drum synthesis on it all in one box, and I love that. I love the fact that I can... Oh, my God, my dogs are missing. I hear you, Pepper. Sorry, she's kind of blind and gets scared if I leave her by herself for too long. You're okay. So, man, they're all coming in here. So yeah, like the Tempest to me it doesn't have the thickest sound. So like it's, in my opinion, its kicks are not the best kicks. Its snares sound really cool. So it's not so much about having the greatest sound of all time, but it's about the freedom of creating the sound with a deep synthesis engine per voice, and then having it in the way that you sequence on it. It's very similar to how you sequence on Machine, but you only have like one or two groups, right? So it's very performance driven. You don't have to ever stop the sequencer. There's lots of performance controls.
Oh man, you're gonna love the LXR, dude.
Yeah?
Just describe the LXR.
Well, then I definitely need to play with that. I had two of the rhythms, and it was the opposite on that. Like, I love the sound of the rhythm. I feel like the kicks can get really full. Sometimes you have to do some processing and whatnot, which I'm fine with. But I really don't. I don't like being tied down. Like, I like the idea of like, okay, I can create this stuff. Now I have, my modular drum machine I probably use more than anything, but I almost feel like that doesn't count because it's so many different pieces.
Nice.
But so I have that entire drum rack that is, so I've got all the hex inverter drums, and I've got, what else is in there? Oh boy.
Basimilus. You've got to have a Basimilus.
I actually don't. I've used it and I love it.
What?
And I don't have one in my rack, and I need to change that in my life. That, and there's also some WMD modules that I really need to put in there as well. But a lot of it is like, so I have the Audio Damage Boom Shack, which they don't make anymore, but is an amazing. I mean, it's kind of a kick drum, but it's also kind of a snare drum, and it just does a lot. It's just great synthesis module for drums. But my drum rack has now gotten big enough to where it's migrated out of my drum rack. So I kind of have two now, and what I'm using now is Modbap Trinity, right, which is 3 drum voices in one, right, and it has multiple different what do you call them, like synthesis styles in there that you can select between, and they're all just very nicely curated so that you can kind of get these beautiful drum sounds out of them. I use that, and then I use the VMPD quad drum, and so I have those two kind of like next to each other, and they are I mean, so just between those two modules, I've got 7 different drums going right there. And then the Little Drummer Boy 2, which is like another like 11 drums or whatever. That's done by Mickey Delp, and he did the drum synthesis circuits for Arturia, for their drum machine, the Drum Brute. So it's like a ton of drums in this tiny space, and then I use the ER301, and I can throw drum breaks into that, chop them up, and I can layer it all together. and then trigger it off from like the trigger right, and I get these happy accidents and all that stuff, and I can still finger drum by using MIDI input and all that. So that's kind of become what I use more than anything else for doing drum synthesis like that. But yeah, if it's not just 100% sample based, which would be the 2400 really, or even push, then it's going to be my modular setup, just because it's become so custom. But if we're talking about a single box, the Tempest is like, it gives me a lot of that flavor of, oh, I'm creating a sound completely on my own. I do wish I could put samples into it, but aside from that, you know, because it has a bunch of Gold Baby samples in there, which is great. He does amazing work. He's one of the best drum sound designers out there, in my opinion. So the fact that his samples are in there, it's like, I think it's a great selection of sounds to add in with the synthesis. And his drum samples tend to, like the kick samples that he have in there, kind of make up for the kick drum synthesis that's in Tempest being a little on the weaker side, in my opinion.
Yeah, I haven't used one, but it looks to me, from everything I've seen on it, it's like the ultimate evolution of the sort of late 80s, early 90s drum machines. Like, it's got a full synth engine in there as well, doesn't it, I think?
Yeah, it's basically a 4 oscillator synth voice per voice, right? And there's no this is your kick voice where it's like set up specifically for kicks. This is your snare voice where it's set up. It's a 6 voice, 4 oscillator per voice synthesizer, you know. So, and you can set it up as a polysynth too if you want. But so 2 of the oscillators are analog plus a sub oscillator, and then 2 of the oscillators are digital, right? And those digital oscillators can be regular waveforms, single cycle waveforms, or they can be actual drum samples. And there's a ton of them in there. It has.
I've seen some criticism of it though, and your list is sort of saying that to me.
Yeah. Oh, it's got a
too
ton
deep.
of issues.
It's
No,
so
I wouldn't
deep.
even say that at all. Like that. That's why I like it, but I'm also in the minority there. I think, like, for just a raw, like, very basic. You know, I held up the Tomcat and Rhythm Wolf kind of as a joke. I don't love the Rhythm Wolf, to be perfectly blunt. The Tomcat actually sounds great. The Tomcat is surprisingly good, and I think that's one of those ones that, like, maybe, you know, 10 years somebody's going to discover how great that thing actually sounds. The Tomcat is surprisingly cool. But where was I going before that? Oh God, I lost my train of thought.
It's deep, and you loved it.
So like the Arturia Drum Brute Impact, probably the best sounding analog kick drum out there that you can get in a box like that. Like, I think that thing has, I mean, I've heard that thing through PA systems, and it'll rip your face off. That thing sounds amazing, and it's so cheap, and, you know, whatever.
Yeah, I almost bought one the other day, but then I looked at the specifications and I thought, it's another big machine.
But that's what I'm getting at. Is that it's very
estate.
basic. It's very basic. It's not a deep drum machine by any means, but that thing sounds ginormous. It really does, and I highly recommend, if anybody's like, oh, I want some sample fodder for analog drums, get one of those things, because it sounds huge. But it's the exact opposite of something like a Tempest, where it's like, that thing you could just make a beat on really super fast and be done with it and move on, right? The Tempest, it's like anything I do on that, I'm on it for like half the night, and it can do so much that you'll stay there. Like, I'll even throw synth lines and stuff on top of it and do whole songs on it. But what I like about it is the fact that it's so deep and that you can do all that stuff. The things I don't like is that, so like, there's Prophet VS waveforms are in there, and those waveforms clearly were not, they were either imported incorrectly or something happened when they were being put into the machine and it dropped a sample. And what I mean by that is like, you know, you have so many samples per single cycle waveform. It looks like one of the samples got dropped off, and so all those waveforms are kind of truncated to where they have like a DC offset click at the end. So things like a FM Bell sound from the Prophet VS should be very smooth, aside from some aliasing. instead kind of had this buzziness to them. Um, and so that can be annoying, but at the same time, you can use that for great effect. You can make really great chiptune sounds on it and that sort of thing. And then the bigger issue is more the fact that, you know, it's a product of its era. The processor in it is not very strong. There's extremely limited memory in it. So if you create full songs in it, you're gonna have maybe 10 projects in it, maybe 20 projects in it before you run out of memory. Like it's very, very limited memory in that
How
thing.
do you dump? Can you dump the memory and reload?
I don't work that way, so I can't fully answer that. Like what I end up doing is I just create on it, record it, sample it, and then move on. I've kind of given up on doing stuff that's too much work with it on the memory side of things. The other thing is that MIDI wise, it is very bad. Timing is not good as far as how it can sync to other things. It kind of has like this latency thing. So I tend to not, when I sync it to other gear and play live, like I kind of compensate as I'm doing it. But when I'm tracking it, I track it as audio and then I put it to the grid that way, as opposed to like, if you just sync it to a DAW, like you'll notice that your drum hits will be off and it's hard to compensate for, and it can just be kind of a mess.
We could graph a little mouse track of somebody on reverb moving their little mouse towards the buy button for a Tempest as they hear you talking, and then he's talking about timing issues and starts to move back again.
So, yeah, but
no,
that's the thing
maybe
is
not.
like these are all problems, and they're valid problems for people to scream from the rooftops about. However, when you get past that, when you're just like, you know what, this machine is what it is. The firmware is done. They're not making any different changes to it. What's in there is what's in there. And when you use it in that way, then you just work around those issues. You know what I mean? Like, be creative. That's what we're here to be, is creative, right? So when you start doing that, you find that, like, man, it's just stupid fun. Like, I can make so much cool sounds with it, and I can, if I really need to, I can just sample it. I can do whatever I need to do, you know? And a lot of the times when I use it, I end up producing, like, a vast majority of a track completely in it, and then I just sample that out, you know what I mean, and then play with it. But they are
Hey,
really
I've got to
good.
mention. Don't want to interrupt your
No, not at
Tempest
all.
Love Fest too much, but there's two other machines that in all this time haven't even got a single mention, and I haven't used them, but I think they deserve a mention. And that's the Pulsar 23 and the Modor. Is it Modor DR2? Has anybody used either of them? I haven't used them, but I mean
Pulsar I've
they're a
used.
couple of the big ones, aren't they?
I haven't used the Modor, which I believe is like a digital drum machine,
Yeah.
right? And it looks cool. I've not been in the same room with one, I don't think, at all. But the Pulsar is very cool. I look at the Pulsar the same way I look at like the modular drum synth. It's kind of like a modular drum synth that's been put together for you, which is very cool and a great way to do that. I kind of struggle on those sorts of things where it's like it's super unique and all, but I don't know that I would want to shell out the kind of money that it takes to get one, just because I know that it's so much its own thing that, like,
So specific.
yeah, like I just feel like I would end up building that in Eurorack myself, and then and kind of experiencing it that way, as opposed to having that extra box in the studio somewhere that, you know, I'm going to use on certain occasions and then have to put away or whatever. But it looks really cool and it sounds great. Like it's got its own sound and it's super cool. Like,
Maybe someone that doesn't have a modular, you know.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Like, if somebody's like, man, I really wish I had a modular drum machine that was kind of quirky and had like the, you know, had its own funky happy accident sequencer and that kind of thing. That's where that thing lives to me, is like happy accidents, which I'm all about. Like, I love that kind of stuff.
And the other one I think is the Joe Mox Alpha Bass. I haven't used that one either, but I mean the Alpha Bass, the Isla, the Modor, the Pulsar, and the Perkins. I mean they're the
Alpha
sort
Bass is
of
very cool. Very, very cool.
There's another German brand that makes cool machines.
Oh, they make
Vermona.
the Tanzbar.
Yeah.
Tanzbar sounds the
Danceable.
MFB Tanzbar.
MFB, yeah.
They make, man, listen, the Tanzbar sounds so dope. Like it sound, and they have a few different versions now. Sounds amazing. And yes, I'm sorry that I forget his name off the top of the head, but the man behind MFB had passed away a couple years ago. And
I met his son recently.
yeah, I think he's kind of continuing on the business. Yes,
exactly.
excellent. But I will say, I hated how the Tanzbar felt. Right, like it's very like you look at it and you pick it up. It's very very light. Like you tap on the bottom, it feels very hollow and all. But the sound is like, oh snap! Like that kick is amazing, and it sounds very cool. Has some really interesting programming on it. I first played one years ago. A friend had come by the studio and had bought one, and I was like, wow, this feels cheaply built, but the sound was fantastic. And since then, I've gotten to mess with them a good bit more. And the Tans Mouse is another one that's like, dude, they just sound cool. And like the sequencer is kind of unique, and yeah, very, very worthwhile checking those out. And you don't see them around very often. It's like, it's one of those drum machines where it's like not everybody has that stuff.
Yeah, kind of secret weapon.
Mm-hmm.
I'll play 2 seconds of it from Stimming's video here.
Oh. This one, that's the one.
Anyway.
I like that. Like kind of drip.
Yeah, like they have this kind of. It's not abrasive, like the way the drums come through. Like the snare will like punch through nicely, but it doesn't hurt your ears. Like it's not like
It's from the DNA of an 808, I think.
Yeah,
An idea.
which I don't know if I have a picture of it. Oh man, at the studio I was at last night, we had a rack mounted original 808. Like, man, that place is just a candy land for everything you could think of. We Lynn drums.
I have a
and
daughter knocking over.
oh yeah, just absolutely like every drum machine and synthesizer vintage that you can think of was there. But yeah, rack mounted 808s are awesome because they don't take up space, and it's like yay big. Slide it into the rack and you've got all the controls right there. I'm still a fan of I love the 909 sound. I love the 808 kick and snare, but there's something about the way that the 909 is done that I'm a big fan of. I love the punchiness of a 909. So modern takes of that 909 style sound are like, where they take it just a little bit further and that kind of thing. I absolutely adore that sort of sound where you really punch through things and kind of the hex inverter stuff in my Eurorack case is fantastic. I mean, he just kind of takes like 808, 909 type stuff and then just puts it on full tilt and gives you access to like, extra distortion and.
So what do you think of the Behringer RD9? Have you tried that one?
I'm gonna bow out of that conversation. I'm not gonna talk about any of that stuff. So I had a role in the RD 808 and I stopped doing anything with them a while ago. So I'm just I'll bow out of that. Yeah.
Don't
let
mention
you
the
guys
war.
discuss that.
Don't mention the war.
Dun, dun, dun.
I did it once. I think I got away with it. All right.
No. It's fine. It's just I don't think it's my place to publicly speak on that stuff. So I don't.
Sure.
I just out of respect for those who are involved and all that stuff. I think I just And I haven't messed with the final 909 from that or RD9, so I can't really speak intelligently about how it ended up and all that. So I think it's best I just.
Yeah, there's such a huge choice these days, though, isn't there? I mean, years ago there was a handful, and now, I mean,
There's
how
so
many drum
many.
machines there must be in production? There's got to be, well, I don't know, what do you
And
reckon,
there's
30, 40, 50?
and on top of that, like, dude, the iPad, like Drambo and all these drum synthesis apps that literally feel like hardware. I mean, especially.
Elastic drums, man. Elastic drums, patterning. There's a lot of really good attack. Attack is by Waldorf.
Oh, Attack is fantastic.
There's some really good iPad drum machines. I mean,
And when you have like an
easy
iPad
way to check
Pro
them
is
out.
literally the size of something like a Drum Brute Impact. It's not that much different, like physical layout size. You know what I mean? Um, I was gonna pull up. I have a whole series of just drum apps on here. Elastic Drums, Beat Hawk, Attack, IMPC, Impactor, Beatmaker 2, Arturia iSpark, which actually came with a physical drum controller. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that. Um, Very cool though. You can literally plug in a little mini drum machine controller into your iPad, and it's physical. So what else? Andrombo, yeah. Attack is so good though. Like Attack is that sucker right there is something I highly, highly recommend to people. If you have an iPad, get that app because it's a playground for drum synthesis.
the manual is actually a lesson.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
If you, if
great.
you, you can learn drum synthesis from the Impact manual.
Quincas, Quincas.
Yes.
While the girls are there, now they're leaving. I have a video I would like to show,
Yeah.
and maybe they want to see it too.
Oh, girls. Yara? Is Nina there? Well, you come. They want to show you a video.
This video doesn't really need subtitles. We know what's happening. So here it is.
¿Mejor así? Look how she's grown.
Yeah, she's
That was
she's
a
a big
while
girl
ago.
now.
Oh, she was scared. Daddy was scaring her with weird synthesizer sounds.
No, Daddy, not the modular again.
So someone in the chat said it was great to live in the forest where you could play drums anytime, but you have the girls around you.
Yes.
I tell you what, it looks. I saw the pictures when you
Place too.
first moved there. It looks so gorgeous there.
Oh man, it's great. I'm happy.
That's like my dream area. I love the forest, so that's why I always wear green of everything. Is because I love the forest. So beautiful.
You're welcome to come make a record with me.
It's
anytime.
gonna happen one day. I guarantee it. So I'm gonna just randomly show up on your doorstep. Where's the drum machines?
There's a bathroom and a bedroom downstairs.
That's all I need. That and some coffee.
But it's getting late or early for some of you, but very late for Richard. So it is time to end it for this time, and perhaps we should do a sequel to this drum machine show.
It's
Is that
been
the
great.
dust? Is that the dust show that we were talking about?
Perhaps.
Still got my brush.
And there is something from Ken I would like to play. He just made a small sound library.
Oh
And,
yeah,
um,
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's this one. Don't I have audio?
So, yeah, these sounds are in the official Hydrosynth group on Facebook. every month I'm putting in sounds for the Hydrosynth, new sounds for it, and they all
Awesome.
tend to have a theme around them. And this one was, I kind of wanted a string synthesizer. I was in the mood for like a old Roland string
Selena.
synth, and I was like this close to buying one, and I was like, what am I doing? Like, let me just make some string synth sounds that I can pull up. And so I created a library of string synth sounds that kind of function in a very similar way to an actual string synthesizer, so that you can actually hit the buttons to turn on the voices and that sort of thing. And
Oh,
that pack is free in the Hydrosynth group, so you just go in there and you can
Yeah.
throw it into your and it works on all the Hydrosynths, so
Yeah. It didn't work in this browser, so
that's okay. People can find it.
so I was hoping to play some sounds from.
They're not
I
drum
like
machine
that.
sounds.
I like that idea though that sometimes you're sort of lusting after a bit of gear or a bit of sound, and then you've got to sort of go, hang on a second, stupid.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
can
yeah.
already do it if I just try a bit.
So yeah, I've really been struggling to like try to keep my gear lust in check, especially when I go to studios where it's like, um, yeah, the way my bank account's set up, like it's I'm not gonna do that. I'm not going out and buying like a floor to ceiling Moog modular or something, you know. So like a lot of things have been me just really like thinking about like, well, I put all this time into learning synthesis. Should probably utilize that effort into creating those sounds in the ways that I know, as opposed to like just feeding the monster of buying more gear, you know.
uh, I'm buying, spending my money on cymbals.
Well, yeah, and
$600 for a ride cymbal, man. It's like buying a freaking make noise module.
I'm
Why
so
don't you
happy
buy a
that I'm
drum
terrible at
machine?
playing drums, because then I buy less of them.
Hey, can I give you guys a sample to flip for next time?
Yeah,
All
absolutely.
right, check this out.
I didn't do it, but I was about to say, "Get on up" or something like that. Yeah. Oh, she could have done it.
¿No la gatija?
Pasó
Por mi
tu
ventana?
estudio.
No. Well, apparently we have a lizard lurking around outside.
Yeah, that's
And
great.
how big are the lizards there?
What's that?
Yes. How big are the lizards in Mexico?
Oh,
Mexico?
well, there's big ones, but I think this was just like kind of a salamander
Oh,
size.
okay. Yeah.
It was a little one. It was a little one. There's lots of no. That's crazy wildlife over here.
Hmm.
Very
In
nice.
Denmark, they are not larger than this salamanders. So we don't have big lizards.
So,
Well-
Quincas, at the end of the drum machine show, your advice is the best drum machine is the
Is a
human
drummer.
player.
Just learn to play the fucking drum.
That's what we've decided after 2.5 hours. Just play the damn drums yourself.
Yeah,
Right.
I keep an acoustic
That's
kit
good
in my
wisdom.
studio too, and let me tell you, learning drums is not that easy.
It's not trivial, man. I feel like I'm training for a marathon. I'm like 2 hours a day on like rudiments and stuff. It's
And just,
Yeah.
just wait till you get older.
yeah. Well, I'm getting there.
But that's why session drummers exist, and then of course
drum
frustration
machines.
with session drummers, and then we're back to drum machines.
And you know what? You can just go to Fiverr and get a really badass drummer from Bangladesh to bang on your track with really cool sounds. And, you know, there's always that too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. But I will say thank you all, and I hope we can join again someday and continue the talk on drum machines. It's been a pleasure.
And I deeply apologize again for being late. I'm sorry. I was completely asleep until Quincas sent me a message, and I looked and I was like, oh.
Like, dude, what's up?
That was good. You added a new flavor to part 2, so it was good.
I didn't get home until like 2 something in the morning, so it was. Yeah,
It's all good, man.
Yeah.
But I have to find the exit video. So thank you very much, and thank you to the chatters. It's been a pleasure to entertain you all, or whatever.
Yep, I've been reading the comments as well, so don't think your comments haven't been noticed.
Yeah. So let's end it here.
Okay.